Please take care of Jonathan. Don't look for me. One day, my husband Adam, who had been married before and had a child, left this note along with the divorce papers and disappeared from Jonathan and me. That was 3 years ago. A lot has happened since then. Jonathan and I worked hard to find happiness together. And just when things were finally going well, Adam suddenly came back. Without a hint of remorse for leaving us, he said something unbelievable. I'm getting remarried, so I want Jonathan back. Huh? You think I'm just going to agree to that? Get out. After Adam left, 10-year-old Jonathan stared at the business card his dad had left behind. Tomorrow, I'll go see him. The next day, just as he said, Jonathan went to see Adam. But he came back a few hours later with a shocking revelation. This is the guy. What? I live with my husband, Adam, who's 10 years older than me, and his 6-year-old son, Jonathan. We only became a family last year. I knew from the start that Adam had been married before and was raising Jonathan. He'd told me that his previous marriage had ended due to his ex-wife's spending habits and other unavoidable issues. Seeing him set Jonathan's face as his phone's lock screen and race home every day to pick him up from daycare, I believed he was a caring and gentle man, devoted to his family. As I spent time with Adam, who was warm and calm, I came to believe that no matter what challenges we faced, we'd be able to overcome them together. I was new to both marriage and parenting, so my relationship with Jonathan, who was now technically my son, felt a bit tense at first. But Jonathan, who was friendly and outgoing, took to calling me Sophie and seemed fond of me. I'd initially felt the need to act like a mom, but I realized that building trust between us as people was enough. Even though he was only 5 at the time, Jonathan taught me that. As my nervousness eased, the emotional distance between Jonathan and me gradually shrank. Whether this was motherhood or something else, I wasn't really sure. When I bought the light blue backpack he picked out for starting elementary school, I felt a mix of happiness and a strange pang of sadness, wondering if maybe I was starting to feel like a mom. Even then, Jonathan kept calling me Sophie, but I decided that was fine. As long as we could be a family in our own way, that was enough. Adam, on his part, was as gentle and family-oriented after marriage as he had been before. At Adam's suggestion, I became a housewife. Though I no longer saw him in a work setting, seeing him come home on time every day to be with his family made me feel deeply loved. It was a peaceful and happy life. I'd had my doubts before the marriage, but with each passing day, I was genuinely glad I'd taken the leap. But then, one day, Adam suddenly disappeared. That day, I was working my part-time shift at a bakery, the job I took while Jonathan was at school. My shift was supposed to end at 2 p.m., but it ran a bit late. After picking up Jonathan from the after-school care attached to his elementary school, we headed home together. We're home. Jonathan, are you hungry? I bought some bread. Do you want to have some? Yay, I want some. Hearing Jonathan's happy voice made me smile. Would you like milk? Or there's orange juice too. I called from the kitchen to where he was in the living room. Milk, please. Oh, there's something here. Looks like a letter, he replied. A letter. Thinking it was probably just a note from his teacher, I poured milk into 2 glasses and brought them to the living room. But it seemed I was wrong. Here, it was right here. Jonathan handed me a piece of paper. I looked at it and couldn't believe what I saw. Please take care of Jonathan. Don't look for me. It sounded like something straight out of a movie or drama, like a line from someone about to disappear forever. At first, I thought he must be playing some kind of prank. After all, our marriage was fine, our family was happy, and there was no reason for him to leave. Just this morning, We had our usual goodbye at the door. But then, I noticed the filled-out divorce papers lying on the table, right where the letter had been. It no longer seemed like a joke. There was no mistaking it. This was an actual divorce application, complete with his signature. He wouldn't go this far as a joke. I didn't know why, but it became painfully clear that Adam had left us, that he truly wanted a divorce. The realization washed over me, and before I could even make sense of the situation, tears started to fall. Then, a small hand gently held my trembling one. I snapped out of my shock to see Jonathan looking up at me, worry etched on his face. If I'd been alone, I probably would have broken down. I think that's what it feels like when the happiness you thought would last forever vanishes. When someone precious to you suddenly disappears right in front of you. But, because Jonathan was there, I could keep myself from falling apart. Wiping away the tears, I squeezed Jonathan's hand back. "It's okay. You must be hungry. Let's have some bread." I set the note and the divorce papers aside. I didn't know how much 6-year-old Jonathan understood about the situation, and I couldn't bring myself to ask him. But when he smiled as usual and said, "This is yummy, I'm so happy," his presence was the only thing that kept my heart steady. After we finished eating, Jonathan worked on his homework while I did some housework. I kept busy, afraid that if I stopped, I'd start crying again. We had dinner, checked his homework, he took a shower, and by the time I had seen him off to bed, it was already 9 p.m. This was the time Adam would normally be home by. The fact that he wasn't after that letter hit me harder than ever. But with a little distance from the shock, I started to think about what I could do. Even if he'd told me not to look for him, there was no way I could just let it go. First, I tried to reach out to friends and acquaintances we shared, but most of the numbers seemed to have changed. For the few who did answer, none had any idea where Adam was or had any updates. Then I tried calling his parents' home and managed to speak with his brother, who lived there. He didn't seem surprised, which made me think Adam's family probably already knew. But, although he was apologetic, his brother didn't have any idea where Adam had gone either. In the end, I found nothing. Where Adam had gone, and why he'd left, it was all a mystery. The next day, after seeing Jonathan off to school, I went to the police. I thought maybe they could open a missing persons case. If Adam wanted a divorce, I wouldn't necessarily refuse. Deep down, of course, I didn't want it. I wanted us to stay together as a family, just the three of us. But if he had a reason to leave, I wanted to hear it directly from him. So I couldn't just submit those signed divorce papers without understanding why. But when I asked for help finding him, they said there wasn't much they could do since he was a healthy adult who had left by choice. I'd expected as much, though it still stung. With no other options, I decided to try one last thing. I called Adam's workplace once business hours started, and that's when I heard something shocking. Adam, he left the company at the end of last week. I couldn't believe it, but no matter how many times I asked, their answer didn't change. Adam had quit his job a full week before disappearing. Of course, he never mentioned a word about it. What's more, up until yesterday morning, he'd left for work each day, acting like everything was normal. I had no idea what he was thinking. Was the Adam I thought I knew just an illusion? I was staring blankly at the divorce papers at home when I heard a voice beside me. "Sophie, are you okay?" Jonathan had returned home without me even noticing. "Oh, sorry," I spaced out. "Welcome back." Hearing my response, Jonathan looked relieved and said, "I'm home." Seeing his face brought me back to my senses. Even if Jonathan didn't understand words like divorce or disappearance yet, he surely sensed something different, especially with his dad gone overnight. The one feeling the most anxiety right now was probably Jonathan. How could I let myself be crushed by this when he needed me most? Asterisk, I have to protect him. Asterisk, that thought gave me strength. Thanks for worrying about me. How about spaghetti tonight, your favorite? Yay. Even though I couldn't accept the reality of Adam's disappearance or understand his reasons, I had been looking for any excuse not to face it. But now for Jonathan, I made up my mind to move forward. To apply for single parent support, I submitted the divorce papers right away. I took the exam for a full-time position at the bakery where I'd been working part-time, and it was decided I would start as a full-time employee next year. It wouldn't make me rich, but it would be enough for me and Jonathan for now. I started putting away savings little by little, hoping to at least support him through high school, and ideally, even college. Whether Adam would come back someday or stay away forever, I didn't know. But I began carefully planning out our lives so that Jonathan and I could thrive even without him. Fortunately, I wasn't struggling to find immediate work, and I felt quite fortunate in that regard. I started to move forward and found that I could think positively about our situation. Then one day, Jonathan disappeared. This time, with a first grader missing, the police acted immediately. I couldn't sit still and was out searching for him when early the next morning, the police contacted me to say they'd found him. Jonathan had gone on his own to a child protection facility in the next town over. Asterisk, did he not want to live with me, his stepmother? Asterisk, the police and staff at the facility eyed me with suspicion. They wondered if I might have abused him, and while I understood their reasoning, it was devastating. I'd only ever tried to care for him, doing my best to make a happy life for us both. Was I not needed by Adam or even by Jonathan? I didn't want to think that way, but it felt unavoidable. I was overwhelmed with sadness and frustration, but in the midst of it all, it was Jonathan himself who calmed me and explained his thoughts, clearing up the misunderstanding. He had thought that since his real dad and I were now divorced, he, as the stepchild, no longer belonged with me. He thought he was doing it for my sake, and so he'd gone to the facility. In the end, both Jonathan and I were individually questioned about our intentions, and it was confirmed that we had a positive relationship and wished to keep living together. Jonathan and I returned home together, and as the relief of him being safe sank in, I couldn't stop the tears. I thought about how much fear and loneliness he must have felt, yet he still acted so bravely. Can I really come back home? He asked, still looking hesitant. I hugged him tightly. Of course you can. You can stay with me always. After all, I'm your mom. I'd often doubted myself, wondering if I was really being a good mother. But in that moment, the words came naturally. Jonathan, through his own tears, clung to me and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." That moment made me realize that, even without sharing the same blood, we were truly family. 3 years have passed since then. We have been supporting each other every step of the way. His gentle and pure heart has given me strength countless times. Over these 3 years, one significant change took place. One day, I unexpectedly met Josephine, Jonathan's biological mother. Coincidentally, Josephine had been a regular customer at the bakery where I worked, though we hadn't known much about each other's personal lives. One day, she arrived just as my shift was ending, and we ended up having coffee together. During that time, she opened up about the emotional abuse from her ex-husband that had once shattered her mental health. She appeared so vibrant and full of life now that it was hard to imagine the pain she'd endured in the past. I realized she was sharing her story to encourage me, a stepmother raising a child, by showing empathy from her own experiences. At one point during lunch, she noticed my phone's lock screen with a picture of Jonathan and me. She asked, "Is that your son? I'd love to see a closer look if you don't mind." I handed her my phone, and she asked, "I hope this doesn't sound strange, but is his name Jonathan?" I was stunned. "Yes, that's his name." "How do you know?" It was then that I learned Josephine was Jonathan's biological mother. Honestly, I was terrified that she might ask for him back. And while I knew I would have to accept it if Jonathan wanted to live with his real mother, the thought of it made my heart ache. But Josephine never made that request. Adam had once claimed that his first marriage had ended due to his wife's spending habits, but Josephine's side of the story revealed that wasn't true. Instead, Adam had married her for money. She was an heiress from a wealthy family. After the wedding, when his lavish spending drew attention, he started lashing out at Josephine, saying things like, "What do you think I married you for?" He even resorted to violence. Eventually, Josephine became both physically and mentally unwell, and her family agreed to the divorce terms Adam demanded, just to sever ties with him. One of those terms was Jonathan's custody. And so Josephine had been unable to see her son since, although she continued to pay substantial child support every month. I'd never once heard anything about this large sum, though. Had Adam been trying to deceive me from the start, too? Josephine regretted parting with Jonathan, even though her poor health left her with no choice. She never imagined they would reunite under such circumstances. When she did finally see him, she hugged him lovingly, but she never once said, "Come live with me." Perhaps it was due to her family's wishes, but I sensed she held back mainly for Jonathan and me, knowing how many changes we'd already faced. Now, as a friend, Josephine genuinely cares for me and wants to support Jonathan, his biological mother, who meets with him occasionally. It's a unique setup, but Jonathan seems to be content with this family arrangement. Then, something else happened. 3 years after disappearing, Adam returned to her home, making no apologies for leaving or explaining why he vanished to begin with. Instead, he said something unthinkable. "I'm getting remarried, so I'll be taking Jonathan back." Apparently, his new partner's father is a CEO, and they need an heir. My fiancée can't have children due to her health, and I already have Jonathan. It works out perfectly, doesn't it? "You'll finally be free from babysitting a kid that's not even yours," he said, treating Jonathan like some sort of object to be traded. I was beyond furious. "You abandoned us both, and now want to assert your rights as a father at your convenience. There's no way I'll agree to this. Leave now." I think he was surprised at my reaction. I believe any mother would have been angry, but the man I once thought of as a family man was indeed just an illusion. Adam still didn't seem to feel any remorse, looking down at me as he continued, "This is for Jonathan's benefit too. With me, he'll get out of this tiny apartment and live in a huge mansion. He'll have all the games and toys he wants. His life will be set. A smart kid like Jonathan knows what's best, doesn't he?" Jonathan is now 10 years old. He's old enough to decide who he wants to live with, and as a parent, I should respect his decision. Honestly, I felt torn. For the past 3 years since Adam left, and even before that, I'd loved Jonathan dearly, like my own son, and wanted to be there to watch him grow. That's what I truly believe. That is only my desire. Jonathan is kind-hearted, and maybe he's just been holding back, dreaming of living with his biological parents. Perhaps he's been quietly wishing for things he's denied himself to spare my feelings. The more I thought about it, the less confident I felt. unable to believe that Jonathan would definitely choose me. After Adam left, Jonathan stared at the business card his dad had given him. I was too afraid to ask. What are you thinking? A failure as a mom, maybe. But Jonathan spoke first. Tomorrow, I'm going to Dad's. I see. All right. I managed to keep my voice steady, though it took everything in me. The next day, Jonathan left in Adam's car. I was worried but relieved to see him return a few hours later. I knew he wouldn't start living with Adam immediately, even if he decided to. But when I saw him come back, I was overwhelmed with relief. Then I noticed someone unexpected standing just behind him, and my tears dried up. This is the person Dad was going to remarry, Jonathan said. Wait, what? Hello, I'm sorry to arrive unannounced. My name is Scarlett. The young woman introduced herself. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with delicate, pale skin and a frail, almost ethereal quality like someone who might vanish if you looked away. Adam had mentioned his fiancée was in poor health, and she did look fragile. I had no idea why she was here with Jonathan, but her gentle demeanor stopped me from questioning her right away. I invited her inside, but she politely declined. Thank you, but I'd prefer to speak here if you don't mind, she said, starting right at the doorway. And what she said next was beyond anything I'd imagined. I apologize deeply for asking to take your son. I didn't know the full story. Adam didn't tell me, and to my shame, I only discovered the truth today, thanks to Jonathan. I realize now that he had been lying to me this entire time, and I would have walked into this marriage deceived if it weren't for him. I'm very grateful, she said, bowing deeply in apology. She was apologizing for requesting to take Jonathan, and hinted that he had somehow helped her see the truth. But I was still lost as to what had actually happened. So Jonathan explained. Adam had taken him to Scarlett's family's mansion. Scarlett's parents, kind people, welcomed him with delicious food and drinks, showing their hospitality. As the meal was coming to an end, Scarlett's father, Ethan, spoke gently, but with a concerned tone. Well, Jonathan, I hear your current mom isn't your biological mother, and that you must feel out of place. I also heard she drinks all the time and doesn't come home, so you end up handling the household chores. That's far too much for a boy as young as you to bear. I know this might seem unfamiliar to you, but if you'd like, please think of this place as your home and enjoy yourself freely. We won't force you, of course. Jonathan appreciated Ethan's thoughtfulness, but he grew suspicious when he noticed some untruths mixed into the story. Sure enough, he saw Adam whispering anxiously. I specifically asked you not to mention that to Jonathan, but what matters most is how he feels, Ethan replied. At that moment, Jonathan gathered his courage and spoke up. I'm very happy with the life I have now. I truly feel lucky. So I can't become part of this family. I'm sorry. His words surprised everyone, leaving the room in silence. Concerned, Scarlett asked, Are you sure? You're not forcing yourself to say this? Jonathan then recounted everything he remembered. How Adam had been violent with Josephine, how he would lie about taking Jonathan on outings but instead left him at his parents' house while he went to meet another woman, and how I don't drink, never forced him to work, and certainly never hurt him. Jonathan shared that Adam was the one who behaved terribly, lying every chance he got, and that he trusted nothing Adam said anymore. Wait, that was during the time we were dating, wasn't it? He told me he was single after 2 divorces. Was I just another affair? Scarlett's shocked reaction made her parents realize they, too, had been deceived. What's going on here, Adam? Have you been lying to us about your status just to pursue a relationship with Scarlett? Adam tried to make excuses, saying, "No, you're mistaken. He's just a kid, don't take him seriously. This is all a misunderstanding." But Ethan dismissed his excuses. How could a child fabricate such vivid lies? In any case, I can confirm the timing of the disappearances from the records. If there's any falsehood, this engagement is certainly off. Realizing the facade was crumbling, Adam finally lost his composure. "You can't break up with me. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to make it this far? Enough from this brat." He lunged at Jonathan, but the security guards quickly restrained him, and he was later taken to the police. Scarlett apologized profusely before she left, and I felt a wave of relief knowing that I wouldn't have to hand Jonathan over to Adam. But I also worried about Jonathan. He'd been exposed to the harsh realities of adult deceit. While he had bravely shared his experiences, and even saved Scarlett from an unfortunate marriage, I couldn't help but wonder how this would affect him emotionally. I wanted to find the right words of comfort, but they didn't come immediately. I hugged Jonathan and whispered just one word, "Thank you." In response, he hugged me tightly and said, "I'll protect you, Mom." Afterward, Scarlett called off the engagement, and following her parents' advice, she planned to demand compensation from Adam. Josephine, too, decided to take legal action to get back the child support Adam had withheld after he disappeared, saying she wanted to use that money for Jonathan's benefit this time. As for me, I didn't plan to seek any compensation. All I wanted was for Adam to stay out of our lives. Unfortunately, he had other ideas. He returned, shouting, "Let's try again," and "Jonathan is my son," while banging on the door, kicking it, and rattling the doorknob violently. Of course, I called the police. We're also planning to take legal action to ensure he can't come near our family again. As Jonathan watched his dad being led away, I worried for a moment. After everything, he might still have some lingering feelings, seeing that Adam was his biological father. But then, as Adam was escorted away, Jonathan yelled, "Get out, you lying bastard." I couldn't help but laugh. Yes, he truly was a lying, awful bastard. For once, I didn't even want to scold Jonathan for his language. Instead, I joined him, shouting after Adam until he was completely out of sight, "Just leave us alone, you jerk." Maybe it was a bit inconsiderate for the neighbors, but just this once, it felt right. With every shout, it was as if we were releasing all the pain and sorrow from the past. We've been through so much, but that just means happiness is surely coming our way. Right, Jonathan?
I was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. Just 1 year left to live. Suddenly, my everyday life was engulfed in darkness, as if it had been stolen away. The first thing that crossed my mind was whether I should tell my husband Thomas and my son Stephen about this harsh reality. I hesitated for a bit, but ultimately decided not to tell them. I didn't want them to see me getting weaker, and more than anything, knowing how challenging caregiving can be, I didn't want to put them through that. So then, what should I do? The answer to that came quickly as well. I would ask for a divorce without saying anything. Rather, no other options even came to mind. And so, without telling them anything, I began packing up my belongings. Then one day, out of the blue, "Carol, come here for a sec. We need to talk." Thomas called out to me. While I had no definite proof as to why, deep down I was almost certain. Of all things, had he noticed my illness? Across the table in the middle of the living room sat Thomas, wearing a grave expression. Sensing that the moment had finally come, my heart pounded so hard it felt like it would leap out of my mouth. "I'm only going to say this once, so listen up," Thomas began. I swallowed hard. "I don't want to be a caregiver. I saw how much pain you were in. So, I want a divorce. His unexpected words made me feel like everything was going dark before my eyes. I understand. Then, I'll be the one to leave. Thank you for everything up until now. Rushing past Thomas, who looked like he still had more to say, I left the living room. Without even grabbing the bags I had prepared in advance, I ran out of the house. Outside, rain was pouring down. Hey Carol, what's for dinner tonight? My husband Thomas poked his head out from the garden to ask me this question, having just finished up his new gardening hobby. It was 3 p.m. A bit early to be thinking about the dinner menu. But then again, this was typical for him. I haven't decided on anything yet, I replied. Is that so? Thomas responded. Thomas had always been selfish since he was young. His infidelity was not just a 1 or 2 time thing, and I had to handle most of the housework and childcare by myself. To top it all off, he got hooked on gambling, constantly betting on horse races and all sorts of other things, winning and losing over and over again. While he never went into debt, there were times when we came close to that kind of situation. Just dealing with that alone was incredibly tough. But then, around the time when raising Steven started to settle down, my mother-in-law Linda had a stroke and became paralyzed on one side of her body. I was the only one taking care of Linda when she needed long-term care, but that burden was finally lifted when she passed away 2 years ago. As for Thomas, honestly, I'm not really sure what he was doing during that time. He went to work as usual, and whenever he had a little extra money, he probably went off somewhere to gamble. It's not like he never contributed any money at all. When he won at gambling, he would come home in high spirits and give me some money for cosmetics, a somewhat nice brand name watch, or living expenses. But the thing is, with gambling, you lose more often than you win. So there were times when it affected our household finances, and I would scold him when he came home after a big loss. Why do I put up with so much to be with him? Honestly, I don't know myself. After he reached retirement age, maybe he had a change of heart. He finally stopped cheating, and his gambling was reduced to just enjoying the occasional horse race. On the other hand, it was surprising that Thomas took an interest in gardening, but it's a far healthier and more wholesome hobby than gambling. Seeing that, I felt relieved deep down. And so, as we reached the second half of our lives, we were finally blessed with some peaceful days. Then one day, sometime after that, a loud yell suddenly rang out, shattering our tranquil daily life. Oh, Carol! I hit it big! The red ballpoint pen Thomas was holding clattered to the ground. What? What happened? His voice was so loud that I ended up yelling back. I got a $1,000 payout on the trifecta. Apparently, he had hit a huge jackpot. Certainly, his biggest wins until now had been around $300. But this time, it was a high-stakes payout of $1,000. Thomas was overjoyed like a child. I know, Carol. Let's go on a trip with this money. Huh? A few days later, as we were discussing it, he came home with a large sum of money in hand. It's not a very reassuring amount for retirement savings, but it's certainly not a small sum either. When was the last time we went on a trip, I wonder? When should we go? And where do you want to go anyway? Seeing him so uncharacteristically enthusiastic, I think back to how we used to be. It wasn't all good times, but they're still fond memories. When I really think about it, it's quite strange that I've stayed with Thomas this long. But even so, he's still undoubtedly my husband. There must be some kind of charm about him that I can't quite put into words. Anywhere is fine. I don't have any particular plans anyway. All right then, I'll decide for us. Saying that, he skillfully started operating his smartphone. I still haven't gotten used to it no matter how much time passes, and I can only use the bare minimum functions. But he has mastered it. Hey, how about we go overseas for a change? At our age, that's a bit much. I see. Then let's keep it domestic. It doesn't quite feel like him, but I don't have a bad feeling about it. The thought of being able to spend our time leisurely and peacefully like this from now on makes me a little happy. Since we have the opportunity, it might be good for us to talk about our future life together while on the trip. He's calmed down a bit too, so he probably won't suggest anything crazy. 1 week before the trip. While getting ready, I suddenly felt something off with my body. In that instant, an intense pain assaults me simultaneously from my abdomen and the opposite side of my back, as if being crushed. Almost at the same time, a black darkness rushes in from the edges of my vision. Before long, it filled into the center. When I open my eyes, I see the face of my son Stephen. Huh, Stephen? What are you doing here?
What do you mean? What am I doing? Mom, you collapsed.
According to him, I had apparently lost consciousness in the bedroom and was immediately carried to the hospital. Come to think of it, he had said he was coming home today. The thought of what might have happened if he hadn't been there is terrifying. It's noisy all around, with several nurses bustling about in addition to Stephen. It seems to be a grave situation of some kind. Is it my fault that things are in such a flurry? I ponder with my muddled mind. The answer is extremely hazy and doesn't come to me properly. Somehow managing to finish gathering my thoughts, a dull pain ran through my abdomen as if I had just remembered it. Unable to bear it, I press on my stomach.
What's wrong? Are you okay?
I'm fine. It just hurt a little. I try to put on a brave face so as not to worry Stephen, but pain is pain. If I do end up being diagnosed with something because of this, I want to keep it from Stephen. And of course, from Thomas too. I don't want to cause them any unnecessary worry because of me. I don't want to show them my weakening self either. Having them take care of me after how challenging it was is out of the question. With that single-minded determination, I somehow managed to stay conscious. After that, I underwent several examinations and was admitted to the hospital that day. I told him I was fine and sent him home to pack some things for me. I also left a message for Thomas, telling him to let him know it was just for testing and hospitalization. All I could do after that was pray that nothing was wrong. That night, a middle-aged male doctor in a white coat walked over to me and quietly sat down. Seeing his face, I instinctively sensed it was bad news. His expression was that gravely serious.
Miss Smith, please listen calmly.
That's the usual line, I thought to myself. My intuition turns into certainty.
Okay.
We found cancer. It's stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Removal of the cancer is impossible.
This must be what they mean when they say everything went dark before their eyes. It must have gone dark like this right before I actually lost consciousness too, but it's completely different from this darkness now. The despair was on a whole other level.
I see. Cancer.
All the various noises that had been busily ringing until then were cut off, and I could barely make out the doctor's words. The reason for all the commotion seemed to lie with me after all.
You have 1 year left to live.
And then the crushing final blow, the pronouncement of my remaining lifespan. Amidst the silence of the surrounding sounds, the only thing I could hear clearly was the sound of something crumbling inside me. Collapsing like a tower of building blocks.
1 year.
It wasn't much to begin with, but all our plans for retirement have been ruined. No, in fact, retirement itself has vanished.
I can only imagine how you must feel.
What exactly can he imagine, I wonder? Amidst the swirling questions and confusion, my unwarranted anger is directed at the doctor.
You could be admitted to the hospital right away, but I'm sure you have various things to take care of. Let's suppress the progression with medication for a while. After that, we can consider treatment options.
But for now,
I understand.
that's all I could say in response. Later, Thomas and Stephen came to visit me at slightly different times.
Hey, Carol! You all right? I'm fine. I just fell and got a little injured. You're making too big a deal out of it.
I said that, but Stephen's gaze, knowing that it was different from the truth, was painful. After returning home once, a sigh escapes in front of the suitcase that was in the middle of being packed. The first thing that comes to mind is whether I should tell them about this reality. I agonized over it a little, but in the end, I chose not to tell them. In that case, what should I do? The answer to this also came to me immediately. Ask for a divorce without saying anything. Rather, this was the only thing I could think of. Once I've made up my mind, the packing that was left half-finished won't go to waste. And so, I decided to start sorting out my belongings without telling the two of them anything. Since the trip was postponed, most of the luggage is still as it was. Thomas was disappointed at first, but considering the circumstances, he kept it from showing on his face. Then one day, as I was switching to packing to secretly leave and working on it, Thomas appeared in the bedroom.
Carol, come here for a bit. We need to talk.
A sudden summons. While I have no definite proof as to the reason, deep down I have something close to certainty. Of all things, has he noticed my illness? Across the table in the center of the living room sat Thomas with a grave expression. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would leap out of my mouth at any moment.
I'm only going to say this once, clearly.
I swallowed hard.
I don't want to be a caregiver. I saw how much pain you were in. So, I want a divorce.
His unexpected words made me feel like everything was going dark before my eyes. Could it be that he heard it from Stephen? Or, I don't know how, but he saw through my illness and brought up divorce with caregiving as the reason, and I couldn't hide my agitation. I knew he had always been selfish, but I never thought it would be to this extent. At the same time, I realized that the decision I had made was not a mistake. Yes, that had been my intention from the beginning. In a sense, I even felt a sense of refreshment.
I understand. Then, I'll be the one to leave.
Thank you for everything up until now. Brushing past Thomas, who looked like he still had more to say, I left the living room and ran out of the house. Outside, rain was pouring down. I had boldly run out, but after calming down a bit and thinking about it, I have nowhere to go. I left behind even the suitcase I should have prepared, and all I have with me is a smartphone that I can barely use properly. I even left my wallet behind. To make matters worse, the rain that was light when I came out has now turned into a downpour. I watched it from under the wisteria vines in the park. Well, what should I do? Going back now would be utterly disgraceful, but for example, to stay at a hotel or to be hospitalized as is, I absolutely need my wallet. Rarely getting so worked up, I was disappointed in myself for forgetting even such obvious things before running out. If I were to have another episode here, a park in the middle of the day on a weekday. Normally, children and their parents would be having fun, but in this heavy rain, the only thing lively is the sound of the rain, not the voices of children. Hardly anyone would pass by. My anxiety grows and swells against my will. To top it off, the roof is wisteria vines. Naturally full of gaps, the leaking is terrible. Dripping from the top of my head, my whole body gradually grows cold from the flowing droplets. It will surely have a negative impact on my illness too. But there's nothing I can do. The rain is still strong, and there's no sign of it letting up at all. I waited for a while without thinking about anything, but there are no passers-by. It seems my only option is to go back once after all. Just as I thought that, I was struck by another terrible stomach pain. Without a doubt, it's the same pain as before. My apprehension was not unfounded. I might lose consciousness again. No, if that's all that happens, it would still be better. I somehow reached for my smartphone, and that's when it happened.
There you are! Mom, what are you doing? In a place like this?
Amidst the heavy rain, Stephen's voice coming from afar kept me tethered to consciousness. Once again, I was saved by him.
I thought you'd left right away, but you don't even have an umbrella. I mean, listen properly to what Dad has to say, will you? Don't tell me you're feeling sick again. Wait there. I'll call an ambulance now.
When we arrived at the hospital, I was admitted immediately. It may be odd for me to say it myself, but it's only natural. And then, Thomas came to visit my hospital room, belatedly. I wondered if he hadn't wanted to nurse or care for me, but I remembered that Stephen had told me to listen properly to him at the park, so I stayed silent. Then, out of his mouth came words that were unexpected once again.
Why did you keep quiet about it until now? Since when?
Not understanding what he was saying, I inadvertently opened my mouth.
You don't want to nurse or care for me, right? If you're divorcing me, why did you come? Huh? I never said anything like that.
I suppressed the urge to get worked up. This isn't home, it's the hospital. I mustn't cause trouble for the other patients.
No, you did say it. That you don't want to be a caregiver. It's convenient for me too, since I never intended to make you do it anyway. Why are you saying now that I won't take care of Carol? What incomprehensible things have you been saying? I don't want you to bother taking care of me, so please go home. That's why I'm asking, why did you keep quiet about that?
Both Thomas and I end up getting agitated. Even knowing it will cause trouble, I can't help but raise my voice. Even so, our conversation just isn't meshing at all. What is Thomas trying to say, I wonder? Then, as if unable to stand watching any longer, Stephen interjected.
Wait a minute. Listen, okay? Take turns saying what each of you is hiding. I'm not saying anything precisely because I know both sides. Have a proper talk, right here and now.
In the end, even he is saying strange things as well. With that, he left the room. I had no idea what was going on, but for now, I explained my current condition, lying in a hospital bed. Honestly and calmly, no matter what.
Stage 3 pancreatic cancer, huh? I see.
What are you hiding?
Well, I was told I have lung cancer too. 6 more months, 10 months at most, they said.
I couldn't believe it. If that's the case, what was the true meaning behind those words from a few hours ago?
Carol, you took care of my mother, didn't you? I couldn't do anything for you. That's why I didn't want to burden you anymore because of me. So, I said I didn't want to make you be a caregiver. I didn't know that even you had gotten cancer.
Hearing his confession, my emotions were in turmoil, but the first thing I thought was that his lack of communication was unbelievable. If he had properly explained the situation, we wouldn't have been having this conversation in the hospital room, at least.
Then you should say that more clearly. I'm sorry. I didn't want to tie you down at this age, Carol. That's why I was planning to go on one last trip and tell you everything then. I thought rather than having you take care of me, I wanted you to do more of what you like.
He pauses for a moment before continuing.
But to think that even you would get cancer. What are the chances of that?
In the end, we had been thinking the same thing. We had both hidden our illnesses and were just trying to gain the satisfaction of our own selfish self-sacrifice. I feel like I understand now why we were drawn to each other.
I was thinking the exact same thing. I'm sorry for keeping quiet.
No, I'm the one who should apologize. I'm sorry for always causing you trouble. If it's all right with you, Carol, would you stay with me for just a little longer? I know I'm saying something selfish, but if we both have short lifespans, I want us to do what we want to do together.
In this situation, I couldn't find any particular reason to refuse. More than anything, I couldn't help but feel that this exchange was ridiculous, and I couldn't help but laugh.
What? I'm being serious here.
I know. That's exactly why it's funny, isn't it? To think we were both trying to do the same thing. Going overseas is definitely impossible, though.
I know. That was a joke. After all, at that time, I had already been given my terminal diagnosis.
Even though he had coincidentally won big on horse racing, it seems he had suggested going on a trip at that timing because he was thinking ahead after all. It made sense that it was unlike Thomas. From that rainy day onward, we each decided to receive palliative care, and while going to the hospital repeatedly, we continued living at home as we had been. The episodes aren't completely suppressed, but they're quite stable. And right now, we were in the middle of selecting a travel destination once again.
This city, or somewhere close to here, right?
While Thomas agonized beside me, I was looking for a hospice, not a travel destination. We had agreed that we both didn't want Stephen to have to take care of us, and decided to enter a hospice together. Once we return from the trip, we'll be admitted to the hospice together. A final trip, 1 night and 2 days. Visiting tourist spots and eating at delicious-looking restaurants, we talked about each other.
When I was young, I really caused you nothing but trouble. I'm sorry.
Not just when you were young. Even just recently, I almost caught a cold because of your lack of communication.
I'm sorry. And if we're talking about that, we're both guilty, aren't we? Trying to leave without a word.
I knew how hard caregiving is, so I didn't want to make you do it.
That's why I said we're both guilty. I didn't want to make you do that kind of thing twice either. But thanks to Stephen, we were able to talk and move things in a good direction.
Inevitably, the conversation gets more lively about the recent big events rather than the past. He had always been unfaithful, had a terrible gambling addiction, and was selfish. And when he suddenly brought up divorce that time, I thought his self-centeredness had finally reached its peak. However, our stories didn't match up, and we ended up troubling our son. If we don't reflect on this, what are we even reflecting on? I don't know about everything up until now, but at least at that time, he was thinking of me, even if he was lacking in his words. Just that made me a little happy after all.
So, I wanted to go on one last trip with you, Carol, but is there anything you want to do?
Thomas asked while eating his meal. He doesn't look at all like a terminal cancer patient. That aside, I seriously considered his question.
Horse racing.
Huh?
I want to try horse racing. 1 week before entering the hospice, we went to a nearby racetrack. Unless something major happens, this will likely be our truly final outing together.
Are you really going to bet?
Yeah. I'm serious. That being said, I wasn't particularly concerned about winning or losing. I simply wanted to experience gambling purely. On the other hand, I also wanted to know the reason why Thomas found it so interesting that he got hooked even when he lost.
Are you going to pick the horses yourself?
Thomas had his usual serious style, with a red ballpoint pen tucked behind his ear and a folded racing newspaper. Of course, he probably intends to win this time too.
Of course. If I pick a horse with a name I like, beginner's luck will make me win, right?
It's a commonly heard superstition.
Then pick as you like.
It wouldn't be interesting to bet a small amount at this point, so I chose a trifecta. I guess we might be similar in some ways, after all. The fanfare resounded, and the venue was greatly excited. Just being able to feel this excitement on my skin made me feel like it was worth coming.
No way! You've got to be kidding me!
The numbers and their order being announced sound familiar.
Let me see that for a sec.
I didn't even need to know the results anymore.
You actually won!
The payout was an unbelievable $2,000. Double the highest payout amount Thomas had ever won. And so, we enjoyed our brief remaining time and finally moved into the hospice. It's a nice place with attentive care and facilities. A much cleaner place than I had imagined, and I really took a liking to it. If Stephen hadn't come to pick me up on that rainy day, we probably would have passed each other by and wouldn't have been able to come here. In my case, I might not have even been alive in the first place. And now, I get to be with the person I love most, with whom I've shared joys and sorrows for decades. We were able to make our final memories too. It was the best possible end of life.
This is a nice place. I still can't relax, but I guess I'll get used to it eventually.
Thomas mutters to himself. Because I'm in the same position, I can understand the emotions packed into those words. How much longer will we be able to live, I wonder? I felt the exact same way. It's not hard to imagine that if we couldn't be together, we would have been crushed by anxiety. But now, that wasn't the case. If I believe the doctor's words, he will likely be the first to face his final moments. But that doesn't mean I can let my guard down. I don't even need to think about what would happen if I left him alone. I have to live with all my might so that I don't end up leaving him behind, unreliable as he is. Thomas's self-centeredness is probably more incurable than cancer, so he'll surely be the one to leave me behind. I'd prefer if he could live longer than me, but even so, I don't mind. I'm used to his selfishness, after all. And then, that morning arrived. From the day he was given 10 months to live, Thomas fought and endured cancer for a whole year. Unlike that day, the sky is so clear it feels refreshing. With this weather, he surely won't get lost on his way to his destination.
Carol, I'm sorry for always causing you trouble.
Lying in the hospital bed, Thomas had become thin and frail over the past year. Honestly, it was a sight I could hardly bear to see.
What are you saying at this point? We already finished talking about that, didn't we?
I see. Thank you.
No, I really thank you.
When I try to hold back my tears, my chest starts to hurt instead. When I realize that this is truly goodbye, I'm overwhelmed by a surge of emotions. But I'll be joining him soon too. Thinking that, my chest feels a little lighter. Because we'll surely meet again soon.
Dad, you did well. Rest in peace. Good night. I'll be joining you soon too, okay?
As Stephen and I, along with the doctors and caregivers, watched over him, the starting fanfare resounded. Is that cake shop really that big of a deal? I asked curiously.
It seems so. Well then, it must be worth a lot of money.
Megan, my mother-in-law, replied with a nasty grin spreading across her face. My husband Brian chuckled in agreement.
We've got Dad's will, so now we can live it up in luxury.
But doesn't Nicole have a will too? Megan questioned, raising an eyebrow. Brian scoffed, holding up a white envelope.
What, this thing about leaving the cake shop to her? It's nothing. We can just toss it out of the envelope.
He proceeded to rip the envelope to shreds and discard it carelessly. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I had never been legally adopted by my father-in-law, Joseph. Therefore, I had no rightful claim to his inheritance. If Megan and Brian took all of Joseph's assets for themselves, I probably would have accepted it without complaint. However, I could not tolerate them blatantly disregarding Joseph's final wishes. And on top of that, all they cared about was the money. If money was so important to them, then they should just keep treasuring it until the very end. When that money eventually ran out, maybe then they would finally realize the magnitude of what they had lost. I quietly turned my back on the two of them in the living room. My name is Nicole. This year marks my 40th birthday, a milestone age. And in my life, I find myself standing at a major crossroads. The truth is, I'm currently agonizing over whether or not to get a divorce. Brian and I got married over a decade ago. We don't have any children, but I wouldn't say our relationship is bad. However, if you asked me if I still love Brian, I'd honestly have a hard time answering. Brian doesn't cheat on me, and he's diligent in his work. It's just that he's hopelessly irresponsible when it comes to money. And whenever he's in a bind, he goes running to Joseph for help. I wish he'd stop relying on his parents like a child and act more like a grown adult. Whenever I try to scold Brian about this, Megan always jumps to his defense.
Don't you dare lecture him in that high and mighty tone.
She snaps at me condescendingly. I wonder what Brian will do once Joseph is gone. Watching Joseph lying in his hospital bed, I let out a quiet sigh. But arguing with Brian about money is nothing new. To be honest, I had sensed a difference in our attitudes towards money long before with Brian. In fact, from the very beginning when we first met, I had doubts about the way Brian spent his money. For example, there was this one time before we got married when the two of us went to a shopping mall together. In front of a luxury brand store inside the mall, Brian suddenly stopped in his tracks. "What's wrong?" I asked, curious about his sudden halt.
It's just that there's this watch I've been wanting,"
he replied, pointing to a glass display case at the store's entrance. Inside the case sat an array of high-end watches.
$4,000! Isn't that a bit expensive?
I exclaimed, my eyes widening at the exorbitant price tag. Brian scoffed, brushing off my concerns. "What are you talking about? That's practically a bargain." It was true that when it came to luxury watches, it wasn't uncommon for prices to exceed $10,000. However, at the time, we were both in our mid-20s. Not to mention, we were trying to save money in preparation for our upcoming wedding. I tried to reason with him.
Even after we get married, we'll both still be working for a while, right? Once we start living together, we'll have more financial flexibility soon enough.
It would be easier to save money compared to when we were living alone. It was better to wait until we had the extra leeway before making such a purchase. That was how I attempted to persuade him. But Brian simply frowned, unconvinced by my argument.
"I need to buy it now, or else,"
he insisted stubbornly.
"Can't you endure just a little bit longer? Please?"
I pleaded with him. We ended up discussing it in front of the store for about 30 minutes. Finally, Brian reluctantly gave in. Needless to say, I breathed a sigh of relief. I had planned to continue working even after getting married, so I wasn't too worried about running short on living expenses even if we splurged a little. Still, it went without saying that it was better to avoid any unnecessary spending. Brian seemed to accept my way of thinking. I was convinced that with this mindset, we would manage just fine after tying the knot. However, on the day right before our wedding ceremony, we were in our new home where we would begin our life together, unpacking boxes after the move. That's when I opened a cardboard box and unexpectedly discovered an unfamiliar shopping bag inside. "This is Brian's?" I asked, holding up the mysterious bag.
Yeah, that's right. Could you take it to the bedroom for me? I'm going to install the fridge.
Brian replied nonchalantly. "Got it." I agreed, carrying the bag towards Brian's study. However, as I walked, a strange uneasiness settled in my chest.
Wait, was that a luxury brand?
I muttered to myself, the image from earlier flashing through my mind. The shopping bag had the logo of a famous international brand printed on it. Of course, I wouldn't get angry at Brian for owning luxury items. If anything, since Brian worked in sales at a trading company, I wanted him to maintain a neat appearance. But for some reason, it bothered me this time. So, feeling guilty, I decided to check the contents of the bag.
Ah. This is.
I gasped as I pulled out a high-end wristwatch from inside. It was the same one we had seen at the shopping mall. I immediately confronted Brian about it. Flustered, Brian started making excuses.
My boss told me to wear a nice watch, so I had no choice but to buy it,
he claimed, avoiding eye contact.
Then why didn't you discuss it with me first?
I demanded, my brows furrowing.
Well, it's a work thing, so.
He trailed off weakly. He didn't think it was something he needed to consult me about. He knew it was wrong of him to buy it without telling me. Brian spouted off these flimsy justifications. Naturally, I was furious. But there was no point in complaining about it now. In the end, I simply said,
"Next time, talk to me about it first,"
and left it at that. However, even after that incident, Brian continued to make big purchases without my knowledge. If he kept that up, I should have noticed at some point. But I never did. Because Brian's methods were clever and deceptive. What shocked me the most was discovering that Brian had been receiving an allowance from Joseph. Whenever he ran out of money, he would ask Joseph to spot him some cash. It goes without saying that a grown adult shouldn't be doing that. If I had known, I would have put a stop to it. But I only found out about it much later. A year ago, when Joseph was hospitalized for an illness, I learned of it while talking to him on his sickbed. Come to think of it, when Brian heard about Joseph's hospitalization, he seemed quite distraught.
"What? Dad's in the hospital!"
Brian exclaimed loudly as he spoke on the phone with Megan. "Joseph's been hospitalized?" I asked Brian, and he nodded at me while still talking to Megan.
"So, how's his condition?"
I inquired, unable to hear the other side of the conversation but sensing the severity of the situation. Eventually, Brian ended the call and turned to face me. Hesitantly, he said,
"I'm sorry, but I think I should go back to my parents' place." "You're right. That's probably for the best."
I agreed, understanding his concern. "No, that's not what I meant.
I want to live with my mom at their house,"
he clarified, his words catching me off guard. Certainly, with Joseph's absence, I was worried about Megan. However, the idea of moving in with my in-laws seemed like too sudden of a development. As I silently pondered what to do, Brian began explaining his reasons for wanting to live together. Brian was the only child of his parents, so if things continued like this, Megan would end up alone. Additionally, Joseph ran a cake shop, and even while hospitalized, there would be a need to communicate with the store. But Megan had very little work experience, and it was doubtful that she could properly assist with the business. Therefore, it would be better for either Brian or me to lend a helping hand. Brian shared all of these thoughts with me.
"But what about work?"
I asked, knowing that if we both moved in with his parents, we would have no choice but to quit our jobs. That wouldn't solve the problem at hand. Just as I was thinking this, Brian continued with a smile. "It's okay. I'll put in a request for a transfer," he assured me.
A transfer?
"Yeah, my company has a branch office near my parents' house," he explained. The trading company Brian worked for had several branch offices throughout the country. Apparently, one of them was located close to his parents' home. If he transferred there, he wouldn't have to quit his job. Brian shared this information with me.
But it's impossible for me,
I pointed out.
right? Your company is.
He trailed off, realizing the predicament. My company only had the headquarters where I currently worked. His parents' house was too far away for me to commute. That being said, Joseph had always been kind to me from the moment we first met. I wanted to repay his kindness before it was too late, and I regretted not doing so. After much contemplation, I made the decision to quit my job. Brian, on the other hand, submitted a transfer request to his company. Fortunately, his transfer to the branch office near his parents' house was approved. Meanwhile, I left my job and began helping out Joseph. That's when Joseph said something unexpected to me. "Nicole, if you're interested, how about becoming an employee at our company?"
What? Me?
I asked, taken aback by his offer.
Yeah, it wouldn't be right to have you work without pay. If you become an employee, I can give you a salary.
He explained with a warm smile. It was an offer too good to pass up. I immediately accepted his proposal. Subsequently, I was hired as a mid-career employee at Joseph's cake shop. Megan wasn't too thrilled about the idea, but when I told her I would take care of Joseph, she reluctantly nodded in agreement. And so, I embarked on a new beginning at Joseph's cake shop. Once I started working there, I realized it was an even better workplace than I had imagined. There were talented pastry chefs and many kind-hearted individuals. The cake shop is such a wonderful place. Why didn't you take over the business, Brian? I asked him shortly after I began working there. Logically, Brian should have been the successor. However, he had chosen to work for a trading company instead. Apparently, he had no intention of inheriting the cake shop. It was something we had discussed before getting married, but actually working there made me wonder why he didn't want to take over the store. The cake shop isn't cool at all.
It doesn't seem to make much money either.
Brian remarked nonchalantly.
What? Not cool? Not profitable?
I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Yeah, I've been to the store a few times. But there are hardly any customers.
He continued, but I couldn't process the rest of his words. In essence, his reasons seemed to be that the shop wasn't stylish enough and didn't appear to be lucrative. I couldn't believe he thought of Joseph's work in such a way. I felt my affection for Brian instantly grow cold. This incident occurred about a year ago. Since then, while discussing work with Joseph, I learned that he had been giving money to Brian. However, Joseph added that it was an old story. When I asked him how long ago it was, Joseph simply laughed.
It hasn't happened in the past few years. He probably wanted to impress you since you had just gotten married.
Joseph explained with a knowing smile. It seemed that Brian had told Joseph he bought the luxury items to show off to me. Although the stories didn't quite match up, I didn't say anything to avoid burdening Joseph. Some time later, Joseph's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. Gradually, it became difficult for him to even hold a conversation. Amidst all of this, Joseph made a certain request of me.
So, could I ask you to do that for me?
He inquired, his voice weak but hopeful.
I don't mind at all, but are you sure?
I asked, wanting to confirm his intentions.
Yeah. Recently, I've started to understand a lot of things just by the atmosphere.
Joseph replied, chuckling contentedly. That was the last proper conversation I had with Joseph. A few days later, he lost the ability to speak. I told Megan and Brian that I wanted them to come visit Joseph.
What? Visit him? I'm too busy for that.
Megan dismissed the idea coldly. I couldn't fathom what she could be so busy with. In any case, Megan refused to visit Joseph. Brian also claimed he couldn't go see Joseph because of work.
Don't say that. This might be the last chance.
I pleaded, my heart sinking.
I know, but it's for work.
Brian responded with a casual attitude. I was utterly furious. In a situation like this, I could understand why Joseph had made that request to me. I had completely lost patience with Brian. This was something I needed to consider divorce over. I began contemplating the idea of leaving Brian. Around that time, Joseph passed away. My mind went blank. There were still so many things I wanted to discuss with Joseph. I couldn't let it end like this. Pushing my emotions aside, I started preparing for Joseph's funeral. David, one of Joseph's subordinates and a talented pastry chef from the cake shop, came to help. However, for some reason, David and Megan started arguing.
What? Why would you make it so extravagant?
Megan scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain.
Well, many people from the shop and other related parties will be attending.
David tried to explain patiently.
Just keep it simple. The shop isn't paying for the funeral expenses, are they?
Megan snapped back. It seemed they were clashing over the scale of the funeral. Megan wanted to keep it modest to reduce costs. On the other hand, David insisted that they should make it a larger event considering the number of attendees.
There are other expenses to worry about, and it's already a burden. Surely you understand that much?
Megan argued, her frustration mounting.
I do understand, but we're expecting a large turnout.
David countered, standing his ground.
What? But that's not what we had in mind.
Megan started, but I couldn't see the conversation going anywhere productive. Left with no choice, I intervened.
Megan, let me handle the funeral arrangements. Why don't you go rest over there?
I suggested, trying to defuse the situation.
What? You're treating me like I'm in the way.
Megan bristled, clearly offended.
You've been by Joseph's side for many years.
I began, attempting to reason with her. It was only natural for her to feel devastated. It would be best for her to take a break now. I tried to persuade Megan in this manner. In response, Megan turned to me with an irritated expression and declared,
Do whatever you want. But I'm not paying a cent more than what I've already prepared. I'll cover any shortfall.
I reassured her, hoping to ease the tension. Megan simply snorted in response. Brian, who was standing next to her, tried to calm Megan down while addressing me. Sorry, but can I leave that side of things to you? I'll take care of Mom. It was more convenient for me that way as well. With that in mind, I entrusted Megan to Brian's care. From then on, David and I proceeded with the funeral preparations. Thanks to our efforts, we were able to hold a dignified funeral ceremony. However, the decision to make the funeral a larger affair ended up backfiring. In addition to those related to the cake shop, many other people attended the funeral. Among them were individuals from local businesses and even politicians. Megan and Brian were taken aback by the sight of the attendees. As the funeral drew to a close, Brian approached me with a question. Hey, was Dad actually famous or something? He asked, his brows furrowed in confusion.
Joseph was beloved by many people. And of course, the cake shop is well known too.
I explained, a sad smile on my lips. I see. I had no idea," Brian murmured, his shoulders slumping slightly. He seemed a bit dejected. Perhaps he had finally realized his father's greatness. If he truly felt that way, maybe I wouldn't need to go through with the divorce after all. With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I mourned the loss of Joseph. The day after the funeral, I headed to the cake shop to retrieve Joseph's belongings. At home, Megan and Brian were busy cleaning up after the funeral. When I returned, I would need to help out as well. Thinking this, I hurried back home.
I'm back,
I called out as I entered the house. But there was no response. Wondering what was going on, I made my way to the living room. That's when I overheard Megan and Brian's conversation coming from the room. There were some famous people among the attendees, weren't there? Megan remarked, a hint of surprise in her voice.
Yeah, I was shocked to see the department head of one of our major client companies there,
Brian replied with a sigh. Meanwhile, Megan continued with a frown. Could it be that the cake shop is actually a big deal?
It seems so,
Brian agreed, nodding his head.
Well then, it must be worth a lot of money,
Megan said, a nasty grin spreading across her face. Brian responded with a smile of his own.
We've already got Dad's will, so we can live a life of luxury from now on,
he declared, a gleam in his eye.
But doesn't Nicole have a will too?
Megan asked, raising an eyebrow.
What, this will about leaving the cake shop to her? This thing, we can just toss it out of the envelope,
Brian scoffed, ripping the white envelope he held in his hands and discarding it. In that instant, something inside me snapped. I had never been legally adopted by Joseph. Therefore, I had no rightful claim to his inheritance. If Megan and Brian took all of Joseph's assets for themselves, I probably would have accepted it without complaint. However, I could not tolerate them blatantly disregarding Joseph's final wishes. And on top of that, all they cared about was the money. If money was so important to them, then they should just keep treasuring it until the very end. When that money eventually ran out, maybe then they would finally realize the magnitude of what they had lost. I quietly turned my back on the two of them in the living room. I headed straight to my own room. Making sure not to alert Megan and Brian, I discreetly gathered my belongings. Well, I only packed a few days' worth of clothes into a bag. Then, I placed the pre-filled divorce application and a memo that I had prepared a while ago on the table.
This is goodbye,
I whispered softly before quietly leaving the house. I made my way directly to a nearby cafe. There, I searched for a short-term apartment rental in the area. Luckily, I found a vacant room just a 10-minute drive away. Judging from what Megan and Brian had discussed, I might have to quit working at the cake shop. Even so, thanks to Joseph, I had some savings. I wouldn't have to worry about making ends meet for the time being. Moreover, the room I found was available for immediate move-in. So, I signed the lease on the spot. The following day, I moved into the apartment I had rented. First, I needed to get Brian to agree to the divorce. My revenge on the two of them would come later. Plus, I had to carry out what Joseph had entrusted me with.
Joseph, leave it to me,
I murmured, steeling my resolve. I was contemplating the timing of when to go retrieve the rest of my belongings, when I suddenly noticed several missed calls on my smartphone. There were about 30 calls in total from Megan and Brian. The calls were concentrated within the past few hours. I guess they had finally realized I was gone. As I pondered this, my smartphone abruptly started ringing. Hello? I answered the call, my voice cautious.
Ah! Finally, you picked up! Where are you, Nicole?
Brian's loud voice made me wince instinctively. He continued firing off questions without pause.
You didn't come home last night, Did you? Where are you and what are you doing? It doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing.
We're getting a divorce, after all. I replied curtly.
What? A divorce?
Brian sounded genuinely shocked.
That's right. I left a memo saying I wanted a divorce, remember? I placed it on the table along with the divorce application.
I explained, my tone matter of fact. I could hear the sound of him rushing around on the other end of the line. Before long, Brian's high-pitched voice rang out in disbelief.
What the hell is this? It's exactly what it looks like. I've had enough of you only caring about money.
I stated bluntly.
I'm not. It's not like that.
Brian stammered, trying to make excuses. However, he was mumbling and I couldn't quite make out his words.
What? You can't say it clearly because you're feeling guilty?
I pressed, my patience wearing thin.
No. What about you, huh?
He retorted, his voice growing defensive.
What about me?
I shot back, my brows furrowing. Brian's breathing grew heavier as he continued accusingly.
You're saying all this, but you actually went to your lover's place, didn't you?
Huh? What are you talking about? I asked incredulously.
It has to be true. You suddenly left the house, and normally there's nowhere else for you to go.
Brian's voice rose in anger. I sighed heavily before responding.
Sorry to disappoint, but I'm actually at a short-term apartment rental right now. I can't believe this. When you came here, you quit your job, so you shouldn't have any money.
He exclaimed in disbelief.
I was helping out at Joseph's cake shop.
I countered, my frustration mounting. Both Brian and Megan were well aware that I had been assisting at Joseph's cake shop. In fact, it felt more like they had dumped the responsibility on me. Moreover, Megan had even made me take care of Joseph's nursing needs.
What? Were you getting an allowance from Dad or something?
Brian asked snidely. That was you, not me. I nearly blurted out those words in a burst of sarcasm. But now was not the time for such quips. I took a deep breath before continuing.
I was hired as an employee there. What did you say? You've got to be kidding me.
Brian scoffed, his tone dripping with skepticism.
It's not a joke. Joseph was kind enough to look out for me,
I asserted, my voice growing firm. Joseph had mentioned how he couldn't bear to burden his son's wife on top of being neglected by his own wife and biological son. In any case, Brian should have been able to understand that I had my own money now. Brian seemed to have lost his ability to persuade me the moment he realized I had my own money. As if to add insult to injury, I spoke with increased intensity.
Anyway, I want to divorce you, Brian. Are you going to sign the divorce papers or not? Which is it? No, this whole divorce thing.
He trailed off, his resistance weakening.
I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say unless you agree to sign the divorce papers,
I declared firmly, leaving no room for argument. Brian let out a frustrated sigh before muttering something under his breath. Then, he raised his voice louder than before.
Fine. I'll give you the divorce. I just recorded you saying that,
I informed him, a hint of triumph in my tone.
I'll sign the damn divorce papers, so just come back home. We can't move forward with the inheritance discussions without you here.
Brian finally blurted out his true intentions. However, there was one thing Brian had failed to realize. By saying that, he had inadvertently revealed the existence of a will from Joseph addressed to me. I'll say it again, but I'm not Joseph's biological daughter. Therefore, I'm not an heir to his estate. In other words, If the only purpose was to discuss the inheritance, there was absolutely no need for me to be present. Rather, the fact that they couldn't proceed without me implied that I was somehow involved in the inheritance process. He really is an idiot. I let out a quiet sigh. In any case, I had obtained proof that he would agree to the divorce. Moreover, Brian had no idea what consequences he would face. At best, he would come to regret his own words. A slight smile played on my lips at the thought. The following day, I visited my in-laws' house to retrieve the divorce application. Inside, I found Megan, Brian, and an unfamiliar man in a suit. According to Brian, the man was a lawyer. Apparently, they had called him over to discuss the inheritance matters.
If we're going to talk about the divorce, this is perfect timing,
Brian remarked, a smug expression on his face. I had intended to hire my own lawyer. But in a way, this worked out conveniently.
Well then, would you mind handling my divorce case as well, while you're at it?
I asked the lawyer, my tone polite but firm.
Yes, that won't be a problem.
The lawyer nodded with a smile. And so, the discussion about Joseph's inheritance began. Joseph's estate consisted of cash, securities, a house, and land. However, it seemed that Megan and Brian were the only heirs. If that were the case, there would be no need for further discussion. Normally, that would be true, but Megan and Brian had been entrusted with a will from Joseph addressed to me. That matter was likely the reason they had called the lawyer. Did they really want to pretend that the will meant for me didn't exist? I had my doubts, but the lawyer proceeded with the conversation matter-of-factly without saying a word.
So, I understand that you have a will in your possession,
he prompted, his gaze expectant.
Yes. Here it is,
Brian replied, placing 2 envelopes on the table. One had Megan's name on it, and the other had Brian's. The will addressed to me, which they had mentioned in that earlier conversation, was nowhere to be seen. It was to be expected, but I couldn't help feeling bitterly frustrated.
Have you seen the contents?
The lawyer inquired, turning the envelopes over in his hands.
Well, the seals weren't intact, so…
Brian trailed off, his expression slightly guilty.
I see. Let me verify the contents then,
the lawyer stated, proceeding to open the envelope addressed to Megan first. Inside was a single slip of paper.
To you, I bequeath the house and land.
It read, without specifying to whom it was addressed. However, Joseph's signature was clearly present. Similarly, the envelope addressed to Brian contained the same type of note. This one mentioned leaving the cash and securities to him, and it also bore Joseph's signature.
Oh, there's one more sheet here,
the lawyer remarked, noticing an additional document. It stated the following.
Entrusting the cake shop to…
He read aloud, his brow furrowing slightly.
Yes. My father ran a cake shop,
Brian explained, his tone casual.
So, you will be inheriting the shop. I see. Since there are also securities involved, that should work out nicely,
the lawyer commented, nodding in understanding. The lawyer was taking notes while talking. At that moment, Brian shot me a nasty look. Oh, how could he be so clueless? I had overheard their conversation. So I knew that this will was originally intended for me. But Brian didn't know I had heard them, so he just had to sit tight. If he did anything unnecessary, he would only make me suspicious. He couldn't hide his feeling of triumph. I sighed quietly to myself. For now, I pretended not to know anything and kept the conversation going. In the end, the inheritance was divided as per the will, and both of them inherited all of Joseph's assets. Also, Brian seemed quite inflated with pride because he got the inheritance as he had hoped. He easily agreed to the alimony I proposed for the divorce. Furthermore, he signed the divorce papers right there. Here, is this good enough?
Yes, it is.
After the lawyer confirmed everything, I nodded deeply. Then, after the lawyer left, I said goodbye to Megan and Brian.
Well, thank you for everything all these years. Well, we only lived together for about a year, but the marriage lasted a long time, didn't it?
Megan said with a nasty smile. She was probably very happy to finally kick me out.
Yes, over 10 years.
So, what are you going to do now?
Yes, I'll continue working. I have a lot to do.
As soon as I said that, Megan looked surprised. Then, she laughed and said to me, "Didn't you hear? Brian inherited the sweets shop."
Yes, I know.
What do you mean, yes, I know?
Are you planning to keep working there even after the divorce? Isn't that a bit shameless?
Megan sneered. I replied firmly, "It's okay. My job isn't there."
What? Not there? Joseph also ran a confectionery company.
Megan and Brian were surprised by my words. Actually, Joseph had run 2 businesses. One was the old sweets shop that Megan and Brian knew. And the other was a confectionery company, a factory that produced sweets. It had a big factory in the area with a considerable number of employees. Moreover, recently, Joseph had been focusing on the confectionery company, and David was mainly running the sweets shop. I was hired by the confectionery company. So, even if Brian inherited the sweets shop, it didn't matter to me. When I told them this, Brian's face turned red, and he started shouting,
"What the hell? That's mine too."
"Sorry, but it's not."
Why not? Because I got the shares of the confectionery company.
It was a little before Joseph passed away. He asked me to do something. That was to manage his confectionery company. A few years ago, Joseph considered mechanizing the sweets shop. He thought about introducing some machines into the production process and keeping the shop running as it was. But David advised him that if he was going to partially mechanize, it would be better to develop new products that could be fully machine-produced. So, Joseph started another confectionery company. He separated the machine-producible products from the others, creating different products for the confectionery company and the shop. This strategy turned out to be a huge hit. The confectionery company grew rapidly. Meanwhile, Joseph also focused on developing collaboration products, drawing attention to the traditional sweets shop. As a result, Joseph's businesses became highly regarded in the local community.
But you two didn't care at all. That's why Joseph left it to me. Why you?
Megan started to get red-faced with anger.
If you had visited Joseph in the hospital, maybe you would have left the company to you.
Seeing Megan biting her lip in frustration made me smile a little. This was Joseph's revenge. As I thought about that, Brian suddenly approached me. "Hey, Nicole. Let's get back together."
What? Why?
Dad collaborated with the sweets shop, didn't he? So, we should work together as a couple again. It would be better for us to cooperate as a married couple. Joseph would have wanted that too. Brian rambled on like that. But it was far too convenient now.
No way. The divorce is settled. There's no going back. But, Dad, oh, wait, look at this. Look at this.
Brian grabbed the will from earlier. Then, showing it to me, he continued. "This will that says to leave the sweets shop to you was actually meant for you." I never expected him to confess to forging the will himself. I was amazed at how pathetic Brian looked. When I couldn't say anything, Brian spoke up.
See? It's a good deal, Nicole. I'll make you an executive, no, the president of the sweets shop. Do you even understand what you're saying? Forging a will is a crime.
In this case, is it forgery or alteration? I'm not sure what specific crime it falls under. But just hiding a will is a crime in itself. In any case, what Megan and Brian did is illegal. Megan seemed to understand this and was just silently troubled on her own. On the other hand, Brian didn't care at all. He desperately tried to convince me that he wasn't in the wrong.
I didn't exactly fake it. The will didn't have a name written on it. Then it's not clear if it was meant for me either. No, it was in an envelope with your name on it, and
I saw Brian tear up that envelope, so I believe his actions count as destroying the will. Even for that alone, Brian should be disqualified from inheritance. At least that's what I think. But explaining this to Brian wouldn't make him understand. So, I decided to explain it in a way he could grasp. I pulled out a copy of a certain document from my bag. Placing it in front of Brian and Megan, I declared,
"This is a copy of Joseph's real will." What? The real will?
Actually, Joseph had entrusted his will to me. It's a formal document, complete with dates and signatures. And it has the names properly addressed. However, as long as there are no contradictions with the newer will, the older one can still be valid. The only contradiction with the will I have is about the sweets shop. In my will, it's written like this:
"The sweets shop is bequeathed to David." I'll contact the lawyer from earlier about this. What? Then why did Dad leave this one?
Brian clutched the supposed will intended for me. I sighed and explained the truth to him.
That's not the sweets shop, but our company.
If Brian had visited Joseph in the hospital, Joseph would have told him the truth. He would know that Joseph owned both the sweets shop and the confectionery company and was now focusing on the confectionery company. If he understood that, he could have figured out whether he was to be entrusted with the sweets shop or our company. He could have known what Joseph wanted to ask of him and could have advised Joseph right there. But in the end, neither of them visited Joseph. Naturally, Joseph gave up on them at some point. And before he passed, he transferred the confectionery company shares to me.
Paying the taxes will be tough, but I'll do my best for Joseph. Wait a minute. So, I get nothing? That's right, you both might be disqualified from the inheritance.
I responded with a smile. I didn't mind at all. Besides, Joseph had already outlined what to do if they couldn't inherit.
Wait, does that mean we won't get the house or land either?
Megan asked, trembling. I answered with a smile.
Exactly. The house, land, and all the cash are to be donated. No way!
Megan collapsed in tears on the spot. Brian was already in a state of shock. He couldn't say anything, just let out a dry laugh. Ignoring them, I called the lawyer. After that, I informed the lawyer about the other will. I also reported that Megan and Brian tried to take my share of the will. I don't know what happened next. I left everything to the lawyer. All I know is that David inherited the sweets shop. And from what the lawyer told me, the house, land, and cash were all donated. Apparently, Brian ran out of money and said he couldn't pay me the alimony. So, it seems certain. In the end, Brian took a part-time job to pay the alimony. When I asked about his job, he said he quit, thinking he'd get the sweets shop. I was truly astounded by him. Why did I marry such a man? I don't understand now. Anyway, I'm glad I got divorced. Megan and Brian are now working part-time at the local factory. Meanwhile, I'm busy with the confectionery company. I can't take Joseph's company lightly. I work seriously every day. But even in my busy days, there's joy.
Yeah. Today's batch is good.
I taste a freshly made cookie from the factory. A gentle sweetness spreads in my mouth. It's an old-fashioned cookie.
Joseph, I'll protect this flavor.
I thought I'd visit Joseph's grave on my next day off. Just then, the cookie bag fell off the desk. It felt like a breeze blew through the closed office. Suddenly, the electricity bill skyrocketed. In a panic, we called the utility company, and the technician came over, looking puzzled.
Have you seen this wire before?
As my husband, Sam, and I rushed over, the technician carefully moved a plant nearby to make it easier for us to see. From an external outlet of our house, a strange wiring extended, heading towards the in-laws' house.
Do you know anything about this wiring?
Sam and I exchanged glances. We were probably thinking the same thing.
Hey, Sam. Could this be? Yeah, no doubt. This is why our electricity bill suddenly spiked.
Sam then reached out to the outlet and quickly unplugged the wiring. The moment he did it, a high-pitched scream came from the direction of the in-laws' house.
Ah!
It must be Mael, Nicola. Then, some hysterical muttering was heard, and the voice came out of the door, heading our way. And there, Nicola burst out from the garden. I am Mary, a 32-year-old housewife. My hobby is eating sweets. Every day, I gather information about sweets by asking friends or researching on my own. Sam, my kind husband, always accompanies me in this hobby. Sam and I, both the same age, have been together since college. I have always loved Sam for his kindness, unchanged from the moment we met. Incidentally, I also adored Tony and Nicola, Sam's parents who raised him. Many of my married friends struggle with their Maels. I've even heard stories that ended in divorce due to issues with the MIL. Fortunately, such problems were irrelevant to our family. Nicola, who shares my love for sweets, always delights in the treats I bring over, and my Fael, Tony, though a man of few words, always gives a sense of comfort with his constant smiles. Both of them are dear to me, and I like them so much. Tony and Nicola now live about a 30-minute drive away. Not too close, yet not too far, just the right distance. But sometimes, I think, would it be possible to live together with such a couple? Not that I want to live together. But, perhaps, it could work out well. I was fond of them to the point of entertaining such thoughts. However, the world isn't always so sweet, as I would later come to realize the truth. One day, I was baffled by the news Sam shared with me.
What? Tony and Nicola?
Turns out, Tony and Nicola were moving into the vacant house next door to us. I had assumed their in-laws' house was owned, but it turned out to be a rental. They were considering moving since their place was getting old. And when they found out the house next to ours was vacant, they set their sights on it. It was an unexpected close-distance living arrangement. I was instantly overwhelmed by anxiety. We had been getting along fine with Tony and Nicola, but would it continue to be okay? Living next door meant we could see each other every day if we wanted. I liked Tony and Nicola, but seeing them every day might be too much. But it was too late to say, "It's too close, so please don't move in." When Sam heard about the move, he gently advised Tony and Nicola that it might not be a good idea. However, they didn't listen, saying, "We're so close now, it'll be fine." I wanted to kick myself for my previously optimistic thought that living together could be possible. As my anxiety grew, Tony and Nicola moved in. Though I greeted them warily, things seemed fine at first. We kept a good distance, and some boundaries were established. But as they settled in, Nicola began to cross those boundaries. That was the force that overcame all the actions we didn't want her to do. Unannounced visits became the norm, and when she came over, they acted as if our house was her own. Not only that, but our actions seemed to be constantly monitored. Then, after finishing an unannounced visit and dinner inspection one day, Nicola made an outrageous suggestion. "Hey, Mary, I've been thinking, why don't you stop locking the door?"
What?
I couldn't believe my ears. Because can you believe it? In this day and age, Nicola was suggesting we keep our house unlocked, making it accessible to anyone at any time. That's not reassuring at all. Of course, it's unwelcome. Ever since Nicola moved in, even the doorbell ringing startles me, and now there's the added possibility of Nicola slipping into our house unnoticed. Again, of course, that's unwelcome.
Given how dangerous things are these days, I guess not locking the door does feel a bit scary,
I said with a smile, trying not to offend, but Nicola frowned.
Oh, Mary, you worry too much. But it's okay. Once we get to know the neighbors better, I'll make sure they look out for us. Until then, well, Tony and I are around. We'll be popping by often,
she said, her words coming from a place of goodwill, which I appreciated. That's why I couldn't say that her frequent visits were becoming a burden. But there's only so much one can take. Last week, Nicola came over every day for 7 days. I end up having tea with Nicola at our house every day. It's no wonder frustrations arise when we're together so much. I've really come to understand that maintaining distance is crucial in the relationship between a mother-in-law and her son's wife. Nicola has been doing as she pleases, leaving unwanted plants in our yard or planting flowers without asking me. If it were once in a few months, I could tolerate it, but daily is a different story. Regarding the locking of the doors, Nicola has brought it up several times since. I've managed to convince her by emphasizing security consciousness. But then, Nicola started asking for a spare key. That's something I'll have to get Sam to refuse. There's no way I can give such a terrifying item to Nicola as she is now. Though Nicola can be difficult, I hadn't come to dislike her yet. Her meddling comes from a place of kindness. I felt more guilt about rejecting her than anything. But over time, my feelings started to change. Whether it's me who has changed, Nicola, or both, I can't say. But I began to feel discomfort and irritation at Nicola's remarks. It was a few months after Nicola and her family moved in. By then, Nicola's visits after lunch had become a routine part of our household. As for Tony, when I asked what he was up to, it seems he's usually out walking or shopping by himself. I suggested, "You could go with him." But she declined, saying, "Walking tires me out." Lately, Nicola has turned into a rather spiteful mother-in-law. When I make tea, she used to simply thank me, but now she always has a complaint: it's lukewarm or it's too weak. Whenever she opens her mouth, it's either gossip or criticism. Being with Nicola makes me feel negative. Yet, I can't just refuse her, so I nod along and force a smile. It's terrible, isn't it?
The grass in their yard has been left to grow wild. I'm almost tempted to cut it myself.
Nicola was passionately discussing a neighbor's neglected garden today.
Then I called out to them.
"Oh." She stopped talking suddenly, so I instinctively followed her gaze, which had turned towards the bookshelf. Perhaps she found a book that interested her. It would be nice if we could read together in silence. "Did you find a book that interests you?" I was about to stand up and head to the bookshelf when Nicola reached for something not on the bookshelf but on the shelf next to it.
"Nicola! That's not okay!"
I saw what she had taken and reached out hastily. But Nicola opened it with an unaffected expression.
"Oh my!
Just look at this, Mary."
My, didn't we overspend last month? Look at this electricity bill. It's twice what we pay at our house.
Nicola was looking over our household budget book as if it were a gossip magazine.
Please stop! Give it back!
I said, snatching it away, and Nicola laughed.
No need to panic. It's just that, Mary, you seem a bit bad at saving, aren't you? Poor Sam, having a wife who can't save money. You should try a little harder, okay?
I could feel my face getting hot. The cover and spine clearly labeled it as a household budget book. Yet, the audacity to open someone else's budget book was unbelievable.
And sweets, too. I love sweets as well, so I understand, but a wife who can't save shouldn't be entitled to sweets, should she?
Nicola went on to criticize me for spending too much on groceries and unbelievable electricity bills. Then bragged about how good she is at saving. After a while, she seemed satisfied and left. After Nicola's departure, I was so frustrated that I couldn't stop crying. The stress might have been building up. I just can't take it anymore. I cried until Sam came home.
Mom's words don't have to bother you. I know it's hard. I'm really sorry. I'll tell her not to come over anymore.
Thanks, I appreciate it. After being comforted by Sam, I felt a bit better and decided to discuss something else. It was about the electricity bill. Just like Nicola pointed out, it was high. There hadn't been any changes, yet the bill had suddenly spiked these past few months. I was concerned, but dealing with Nicola had distracted me. Sam looked at the electricity bill and frowned.
This is definitely strange. Yeah, isn't it? The next bill is coming soon, right? If it's still odd, we should contact the power company.
A few days later, a bill arrived for over $1,300, more than double the usual. We hurriedly decided to have the power company come and check. The power company employee thoroughly inspected everything. Then, we were called over to see something peculiar.
Did you know about this line?
Rushing over, the employee moved a plant nearby so we could see better. Hidden by long leaves was an external outlet we hadn't used since the house was built. Having completely forgotten about it. From that outlet, as the employee had said, a wire extended towards the in-laws' house.
Do you know anything about wire?
Sam and I looked at each other. Likely thinking the same thing.
Hey, Sam. This means... Yeah, no doubt. This is why our electricity bill suddenly increased.
Just to be sure, we followed the wiring with the employee. Pushing aside hedges and overgrown weeds, we found the wire indeed entered the in-laws' house shed. We couldn't see where it connected from there, but it was clear the in-laws' house was involved. The employee's expression hardened.
Should we call the police?
No, it might come to that, but let's talk first.
This house belongs to our parents.
The employee, tense at first with the suspicion of electricity theft, relaxed upon learning it was a family home.
Is that so? Then I'll leave it to you.
Thank you for coming out. We really appreciate it. We escorted the employee back to our driveway and watched him leave. After saying goodbye, we faced each other, thinking. Sam sighed deeply, holding his head.
I'm sorry for having such a mom. Don't worry about it, or I can't really say that. What do we do now?
Tony and Nicola were probably home, as usual. Should we go talk to them now, or plan a strategy first? Sam, hand over his mouth, walked towards the external outlet left exposed after the employee moved the plant. Earlier, the staff avoided the plant, so I could clearly see the external outlet. Thinking about it, Nicola placing the plant there might have been to hide it. It felt wrong to suspect her, but it seemed the only logical explanation.
What's this connected to?
Sam then reached for the outlet and quickly pulled out the wiring.
Is it okay to pull it out? I just did. Thinking about them taking electricity from our house all this time makes me angry. Well, the employee is a witness. They can't talk their way out of this. If needed, we have that.
You're right. I nodded in agreement. That's when it happened.
Ah!
A high-pitched scream came from the in-laws' house. It must have been Nicola. Next, some hysterical mumbling, then the voice moved towards the door and headed our way. Nicola burst out of the house towards the garden with force.
Wow!
She hadn't expected anyone to be there. Seeing us, Nicola exclaimed in shock.
Oh! You scared me! What are you doing there?
She came at us aggressively, so I stood my ground and replied.
What about you, Nicola? Do you need something in our garden? You seemed quite flustered.
Well, that's... Nicola awkwardly averted her eyes. Sam, holding the unplugged wire firmly in his hands, was right there. Nicola exclaimed,
Ah!
and tried to snatch the wire from Sam's hands. Sam twisted away, hiding the wire behind his back.
What are you doing? No, that's my line.
Sam held the wire in front of Nicola's face and said in a low, serious voice.
This was plugged into our outlet.
Tom emphasized our, and Nicola glanced upwards, momentarily flustered.
So what? Do you know where this wire leads? I have no idea about that. But put it back right now. It's causing trouble over here because it's unplugged.
She demanded it should be plugged back in without knowing where it leads. And she is claiming harm from it being unplugged. That was as practically an admission of guilt. Yet, Nicola seemed unapologetically frantic. The reason for Nicola's panic was clear. I stood next to Sam, smiling brightly.
Nicola, please calm down. We can't plug in a wire when we don't know where it leads. This is our outlet, you know? It's fine to plug it in. Just a bit won't hurt. So. Oh. Nicola, you've always told me not to waste electricity, even a little, and that Sam is unfortunate to have a wife who can't even save on electricity. You said that, didn't you?
Well, that's... Nicola was restless.
It's too late.
She murmured softly, almost panicking.
What time is it now?
It's 9:57 a.m.
It's no use now.
With that, Nicola ran off, stumbling as she went. Sam was puzzled by Nicola's bizarre behavior, but I knew the reason. I whispered to Sam. What? So that's what it was.
Maybe if we wait at home, they'll come by eventually? Sounds like it.
Sam threw the wire down, and we headed back inside. A few minutes later, there was a sound at the door, followed by the doorbell. It was Nicola. I unlocked the door and opened it.
Hello, Nicola. About earlier. Shut up! Move!
As soon as the door opened, Nicola pushed past me, clicking her tongue as she entered. She was visibly in a bad mood. Stomping through the house like a monster, she plopped down on the sofa. Sam, already in the living room, started to speak, but Nicola beat him to it. I'm so thirsty.
What about my tea?
You're so slow.
You should move before being asked.
That's the rule, isn't it?
Yes.
And you locked the door again, didn't you?
This is why people say the son's wife in this neighborhood is so cold. As if there's anything in this house worth stealing. Pretending to be all high and mighty is just annoying. Huh?
Nicola continued to complain. Ah, I can't stand it anymore. I grabbed a half-empty plastic bottle nearby and slammed it on the table in front of Nicola. She froze, eyes wide.
Mary! Here, water for you. And you mentioned there's nothing to steal, but unfortunately, there are greedy and dirty people out there. Like someone who would steal electricity, for example.
Nicola's face showed turmoil. I sat down next to Nicola. Despite being right beside her, Nicola wouldn't even look at me. She looked down, her face turning pale.
What's wrong, Mary? You're completely different. Oh, Nicola. There's only so much I can take. Did you think I was some kind of saint?
I tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but Nicola looked as if she had encountered a demon rather than a deity. Nicola looked at Sam for help, but he just shook his head silently. Nicola had no allies. With an angry daughter-in-law beside her and Sam. As there was no one inclined to help nearby, Nicola's next move was predictable.
I'm sorry. I just remembered something. I have to go now. You're not going anywhere.
I pressed down on Nicola's shoulder as she tried to stand up from the sofa. Nicola's rear sank back into the sofa.
Mary! Really today? You were the one who said you were thirsty, weren't you, Nicola? Surely you're not saying you can't drink my water? After making such a fuss, that wouldn't make sense, would it?
Nicola, with tears in her eyes, reached for the plastic bottle but was stopped by Sam. Nicola looked relieved, but I didn't actually want to make her drink the leftover water. The real issue was yet to be addressed.
When did you start stealing our electricity? Stealing! What an awful thing to say! But the fact is, the wiring plugged into our outlet was leading to your house, wasn't it?
Nicola tried to speak several times, searching for an excuse, but couldn't find any that would work. There was no way to talk her way out of this situation. All that was left was for Nicola to admit and apologize. I thought that was going to happen, but it seemed luck smiled on Nicola for a moment. The doorbell rang, and when I checked, Tony was there.
Is Nicola here?
It seemed Tony had gone out for a bit and came back to find the door unlocked, the TV on, but Nicola missing, so he was worried.
Tony!
Nicola cried for help as if reinforcements had arrived. Tony was confused by Nicola's unusual state. Then, Sam explained everything from the beginning. After thinking for a moment, Tony slowly said,
Isn't there some mistake here?
It's hard to believe at first that his wife was secretly stealing electricity from his son and daughter-in-law's home.
So, who did the wiring? Do you expect me to believe a stranger came and connected our houses?
Tony crossed his arms and pondered again. Then he agreed.
Well, we should probably go and see it.
And stood up.
But...
Nicola tried to stop him, flustered, but Tony asked Sam to show him to the outlet. The wire ran into a shed where it wasn't visible. After checking, Tony came back pale-faced. And immediately made Nicola apologize. I'm sorry. Truly, I am. Nicola silently looked down. Like a child. According to Tony, the wiring was connected via an extension cord to a battery and Nicola's computer. The battery was bought when they moved in. She was advised to charge it during cheaper, nighttime rates, and using it during the day was cost-effective. Nicola had been doing exactly that. Initially, it was just that, but then she started plugging in her computer and other appliances since there were free sockets on the extension cord. Eventually, she used our electricity day and night. Nicola justified her actions by saying it was more cost-effective. It was infuriating enough that she had been stealing electricity. But even more so that she had looked down on me while lying all along.
You've been saying how pitiful Sam is for having a wife who can't save, or criticizing me for buying sweets while being unable to save. Remember?
That's the truth, though. Her lack of remorse was almost impressive.
Saving by using someone else's electricity isn't saving. It's just a crime.
I continued.
And don't think we'll just let this go because we're family. If you sincerely apologize, that's one thing. But if you keep this attitude, we'll have to involve the police.
Nicola looked surprised, as if she thought getting caught would be the end of it.
What kind of daughter-in-law are you? To betray your own family. Don't talk like that. We just want you to make amends because we are family.
As I reached for my phone, Nicola panicked and lunged at me. Sam quickly restrained her.
There's no evidence. With everything laid out like this, you still need evidence? Let me tell you something conclusive.
I pointed towards the roof. Nicola squinted, then realized. Yes, our house is equipped with security cameras, which happened to cover the area around the outlet. Nicola murmured a small, "Ah."
Is this enough for you? And one more thing. There's more? The reason you were in such a hurry today was because of the release of limited edition sweets, wasn't it?
No way. I smiled. Yes. I had a friend get them for me, so I managed to secure them. If you hadn't been busy stealing electricity, you might have been able to get them on your computer, too. Too bad. Nicola trembled and then sat down on the spot. After discussing with Sam, we decided against reporting Nicola to the police. She had admitted to it and we had evidence, but it was too much hassle, and being family, it might get brushed off. Instead, we decided to get a proper apology and compensation for the electricity from Tony and Nicola. It was awkward living so close, but it had to be done. Tony and Nicola, perhaps feeling awkward too, eventually moved back to their old house. Apparently, word got out about the electricity theft, and Nicola became the subject of rumors. Nicola was devastated and wanted to return to their original home. It turns out Nicola thought she was good at neighborhood relations. But in reality, people were just being polite. After paying us, Tony and Nicola were left with little money. But we would not help them. They needed to save on their own, especially on their beloved sweets. As for me, now that Nicola is gone, I'm enjoying my life, deciding which sweets to buy next with the electricity bill back to normal.
Being called by my name just gets my heart racing. It's incredibly thrilling.
In the dead of night, I stumbled upon Tanner and Rebecca, frolicking in the back seat of a car in the garage. Shocked by the unbelievable scene before me, I locked the two of them in the garage and headed back to my parents' house.
I want to show those two, who've been making a fool of me, what real hell feels like.
Back at my parents' house, I explained the situation to my parents and another person, asking for their cooperation in my revenge. Everyone agreed, and I resolved to make Tanner and Rebecca experience true hell. My name is Natasha. I'm a newlywed. I met my husband, Tanner, back in our student days. We were classmates in high school, worked together on committees, and had a few interactions. But that was the extent of our relationship. I never imagined that someone like him would approach me now, as adults.
Natasha, I really do love you, he said.
Our relationship began right after graduating high school. During our final cultural festival as seniors, Tanner started to get involved with me, and we began to interact as friends. Despite barely knowing each other, he started pursuing me relentlessly right after graduation. I couldn't understand why a guy who was so popular among girls during our school days would be interested in someone like me. Even when I asked him why, he would simply say he was smitten, never providing a concrete reason. Suspicious of his motives, I spent 6 months investigating. but couldn't find any convincing reasons, and eventually, overwhelmed by his persistence, I accepted his proposal.
If I just wanted to date and ditch someone, I wouldn't put in all this effort. Can't you trust me already? I truly love you, Natasha, he said.
Hearing those words, I began to consider trusting him. But as a novice in love, it took a lot of courage for me to date someone as popular as him. That's when I turned to my older sister, Rebecca, for advice. Rebecca was beautiful and stylish, rumored to be among the most popular in school, as I heard from her classmates. I thought consulting with Rebecca, who had plenty of experience in love, would help me find the answer. When I talked to her about it, her encouragement felt like a gentle push forward.
Just for dating, a playboy wouldn't spend 6 months. I really think Tanner is serious about you, Natasha. Why don't you accept it?
Rebecca's words convinced me to start a relationship with Tanner. A year went by. In the beginning, Tanner was incredibly kind. He treated me like a princess. He took me to my favorite places, and every anniversary, birthday, and event was celebrated with a surprise, making it feel like a dream. For someone inexperienced in love like me, all these felt like fairy tale moments, and I was thrilled to have taken the chance with him. Until the day we decided to get married.
What's with this filthy room? I like things clean. You know what happens if you turn this place into a dump, right?
After deciding to get married, we bought a new house. Tanner worked as a laborer in his father's company, earning around $40,000 a year. He didn't have the means to buy a house. Yet, disliking used things, Tanner insisted I stretch our finances to purchase a new home. Calling household management a hassle, he dumped all responsibilities on me, living freely himself.
This is your house too, so I wish you'd help with the cleaning. I have a job too, so let's support each other, okay? You can at least tidy up, can't you?
I work as a nurse with irregular shifts. Tanner actually spends more time at home and earns $30,000 less than I do. Despite the significant differences in time and money, he doesn't cooperate at all. I cover all household expenses, while Tanner only spends his salary on leisure and consumables. Before marriage, he spoke of mutual support and striving together. But after moving in, Tanner changed completely. He became a total freeloader. I once tried to get him to cook, but the taste and his knife skills were disastrous. The house ended up a mess, and I gave up on having him cook. If I let him do the laundry, he'd throw everything in together, causing shrinkage and color bleeding. He was far from trustworthy. Even Mary, my mother-in-law, had concerns, but I never anticipated it being this bad until I saw it with my own eyes.
You're the one who told me not to do housework, right? Now you're making it sound like it's my fault when you start getting called out?
Initially, I patiently taught him household chores, but Tanner was short-tempered and prone to violence. Just mentioning household tasks triggered such reactions, and out of fear, I once said I'd handle everything myself to avoid his outbursts. But I'm only human. Nursing is many times harder than people think. My stamina has declined since my early 20s, making it tough to balance home life with work. And on top of that, the household chores have more than doubled compared to when I lived alone. I often wish I had extra hands. Is it so wrong to ask for help in such circumstances? Tanner becomes immediately enraged, showing his aggressive side whenever his sore spots are poked. Once, when I dared to stand up to him, he threw things against the wall and almost injured me. I've been scared of him and even considered divorce, but each time he would become uncharacteristically kind, showering me with love as if he were a different person. I'm sorry, Natasha. I'll never do this again. I truly value you. Please don't leave me. I genuinely love you. I can't live without you. Rarely feeling needed by others, I couldn't dismiss such affection from Tanner and saw no alternative but to forgive him. He was the first person I truly loved. I couldn't envision a life with good encounters after losing him. Such thoughts were reinforced by various things said by Rebecca and Tanner during our relationship.
No one else would put up with someone like you, Natasha.
If you leave Tanner, you might spend your life alone. At that time, I was completely dominated by the thought that no one but Tanner could love someone like me, a belief instilled by his manipulative words. Even when I thought about leaving, memories of our relationship and Tanner's need for me held me back. It's like the saying, the one who falls in love loses. I was completely ensnared by Tanner's manipulative tactics. I want to support you if I can, but housework is just not my thing. I'm counting on you for that. Please don't say such sad things. I'll try to do what I can. He probably noticed my fear after his outburst. As soon as he approached me, he embraced me and gently stroked my hair to calm me. Tanner was skilled at using both the carrot and the stick, always making me feel needed just when I thought all was lost. For someone shy and introverted like me, being needed and loved by someone was a way to affirm my existence. Tanner had great communication skills and was an observant person. He was adept at manipulating someone to the brink of life and death. I was frequently bullied during my school days, which affected my self-esteem. Tanner exploited this, convincing me he was the only one who needed me. He claimed to love and accept even my flaws. Little did I know at the time, this was all part of his manipulative tactics. To be honest, it never even crossed my mind. Until the day I witnessed that scene. As our first wedding anniversary approached, encouraged by my parents, we decided to have a wedding ceremony with Tanner.
Rebecca had her wedding at a garden, but where do you plan to have yours? Maybe a church wedding would be nice?
The decision to have a ceremony was partly due to my parents' suggestion. Dad and Mom have always been deeply concerned about me. They know I'm the kind to care for others, sometimes at my own expense, readily sacrificing myself for the sake of others. When I became a nurse, they worried if I could truly handle it.
You have a kind heart that tends to overdo things. Remember, it's not good to always put others first. Take care of yourself too.
Despite their worries, they were my biggest supporters when I decided to become a nurse. Dad's concern also came to the forefront when it came to my marriage. Usually not one to meddle, Dad for the first time wanted to have a serious talk with Tanner and invited him over.
Natasha is our treasure. If anything happens to her, I'll never forgive you. Are you prepared to take care of her?
Dad didn't hesitate to intimidate Tanner, who seemed nervous. But Tanner didn't flinch and insisted earnestly that he wanted to marry me.
I also want a solemn atmosphere for the wedding, so maybe we should look for a church. I know I've been a burden to Natasha, so I want to make the main event especially wonderful for her.
Lost in thought, Tanner's voice brought me back to reality. Seeing Tanner smile sheepishly made my heart race. I never imagined he thought that way. Partly because his words and his everyday actions are so different. I wish he would be more kind on regular days and not just on special occasions. If we could just eat together, watch movies in the living room and laugh, I'd be so happy. Why does Tanner have to say such awful things? Does he really love me? Does he really need me? Having little experience with relationships, I kept wondering if something was wrong with me. Maybe Tanner's lack of desire is because I'm lacking in some way. I must try harder. I convinced myself, suppressing any thoughts of confronting Tanner. Contrary to my feelings, Dad and Mom seemed impressed by Tanner's words, looking at him kindly.
You're lucky, Natasha, to marry such a good man.
My parents thought Tanner was a good husband. And at that time, so did I. It's true, Natasha is so lucky. She's not good at much besides housework. Are you sure you're not missing anything, Tanner? Rebecca, who happened to be there, sat next to Tanner without hesitation. She flirtatiously placed her hand on Tanner's knee and looked up at him.
No. That's not true at all.
Rebecca is the opposite of me, sociable and beautiful. She's always fashionable and brand conscious. And thanks to her husband who runs an IT company, she lives a lavish lifestyle. Rebecca often looked down on me, belittling me to elevate herself. But she too was adept at getting her way, manipulating me skillfully. Back then, I didn't realize I was being used by Rebecca. I felt happy to be relied on and pampered.
Is that so, Natasha? You too shouldn't let go of such a good man so easily either. After all, you're just a burden with no redeeming qualities. Rebecca!
Such mockery was a routine occurrence. She used her pretty face and tears as weapons, pushing people away from me. Everyone seemed to side with Rebecca. The only exception was my parents. Mom always scolds Rebecca sharply whenever she mocks me. Seeing no way to turn the situation in her favor, Rebecca quickly leaves the scene, but the pain in my heart lingers. What was a joyful moment is ruined by Rebecca's words. Tanner, along with Dad and Mom, apologizes, but he just laughs it off, saying it's nothing. Deep down, I wish for some comforting words, but I don't have the courage to ask for such audacity. It's my fault, as always, I tell myself, accustomed to resolving things on my own. Time passed and it was now the day before the wedding. The ceremony was set to be held at a church, and today, Rebecca was visiting my house. She said it was closer to the venue from our place. Let's call it a night since it's early tomorrow. I'm borrowing your bed. After having dinner and a shower, we enjoyed some drinks. It was past 10 p.m., and we were all feeling the effects, so we decided to get some sleep. I would share the bed with Tanner, and Rebecca would sleep in my room. Around midnight, with the feeling of warmth vanish from the futon, the chills woke me up.
Tanner?
It was still autumn, a bit chilly for a nighttime stroll. Maybe he went to the grocery store without saying anything? It was unusual for Tanner to leave like that, so I decided to look around, starting with checking the car in the garage. That's when I heard it.
No, Tanner!
It sounded like Rebecca's voice coming from the direction of the car. Tanner's car was there, not looking like he went to the grocery store. Thinking Tanner might be nearby since Rebecca called his name, I walked towards the sound.
Being called by my name just gets my heart racing. It's incredibly thrilling.
I spotted the two in the back seat, engaged in something. Just as I was about to approach and call out, I witnessed an unbelievable scene.
Rebecca, can you keep your voice down? It's impossible, Tanner, be gentler with me.
The two of them were naked, embracing, caught in the midst of intimacy. Shocked and wordless, I collapsed on the spot. They didn't notice me, completely absorbed in each other. Maybe it was too hot with the windows up, or they needed some fresh air, but the car windows were open. Because of that, Rebecca's sugary voice and Tanner's animal-like breaths were audible. The disturbing sounds filled me with discomfort and nausea, and I crouched down, trying to hold back vomit. What's happening? What are Rebecca and Tanner doing? Is this a dream? Am I having a nightmare? Unable to believe the scene before me, I kept trying to escape reality. Oblivious to my presence, the two continued their act, engrossed in each other. Tanner's desire for Rebecca, something I've never experienced, painfully tore at my heart. And then, from the two of them, I heard words even more horrifying.
It's like a dream, to be connected with you like this. You really love me, don't you? You did tell me before that you've admired me since our school days.
Rebecca's words, revealing a shocking truth, left me stunned and confused. Were Tanner and Rebecca acquainted since their school days? But how could Tanner have known Rebecca?
When I saw you at the cultural festival, you were just too dazzling. I used Natasha to get close to you. When I heard you were married, I couldn't hide my shock.
Tanner's words brought back a memory. On the day of the high school festival, Rebecca, who was hunting for boys, visited my class's booth. There, as I played the role of a waitress in a cafe, being teased and mocked by Rebecca, Tanner had fallen for her at first sight. Learning that Tanner had targeted me for use since those days brought tears welling up in my eyes.
But now, I'm connected with you like this. When you approached me, it felt like a dream. And to suggest something so wicked, you really are someone not to be underestimated.
Hearing this, my astonishment was apparent. Their relationship started with Rebecca seducing Tanner, who knew he had feelings for her. To be with the married Rebecca, Tanner had to marry me, become part of the family, and not arouse suspicion. Rebecca's husband, Scott, often traveled for work and was rarely at home. Becoming relatives with Rebecca, who was nearly free, meant their relationship would raise fewer suspicions. They reflected on the past, discussing their actions. Hearing this unbelievable truth, I quietly moved away from the scene. Unable to contain my tears, I ran to the entrance, weeping, and collapsed once I closed the door. I can't believe that they had been using me all along. And how they thought of me in such a way. It was unforgivable, absolutely unforgivable. Love turned into rage and hatred, and I, holding the keys, headed to the garage where the two of them were. The garage was secured with a shutter, and the entrance was the only way in or out. By the time I returned, both were exhausted, quietly sleeping in the back seat. Perhaps they never thought I would find out. With a sigh at their foolish actions, I slowly closed the shutter and locked it. Then, I headed to my parents' house, not far from here, and poured my heart out to Dad and Mom.
What's wrong, Natasha? At this hour? And your clothes?
Arriving in my pajamas, Dad was taken aback with his eyes wide. Mom, concerned, immediately let me into the house. Both were somehow awake, which made me wonder. It was unusual for them, with their regular lives, to be up at this time. Had something happened? With that question in mind, I stepped inside, only to find Scott, of all people, sitting on the sofa.
Good evening, Natasha. What's going on? Why are you dressed like that? Did something happen?
Scott was indeed sincere and a gentleman. Too good for Rebecca, he too must have been deceived into marrying her. As I hesitated about whether to share the day's events, Scott seemed to sense something and spoke up. "Did you hear it too?" Scott asked. At that moment, my eyes widened in shock. "Hear what?" "This," Scott said, pulling out a recording device. The voices I heard from it left me speechless.
So bold to suggest something so wicked, you really are not to be underestimated.
It was a recording of the very conversation I had overheard between Tanner and Rebecca.
How do you have this?
My voice rose in surprise, and I was visibly shaken. Scott, looking uncomfortable, started explaining. Rebecca had been reckless with money and men. He found out 3 months ago when someone from his company reported seeing Tanner and Rebecca entering a hotel. After discovering the affair, Scott hired a private investigator to gather evidence of their infidelity. Today, knowing Rebecca was visiting my house, the investigator intensely monitored her, capturing this recording.
At first, I thought if money could make up for my absence and make Rebecca happy, I'd stay out of it. But when Tanner got involved, it was a different story. I couldn't stand it, knowing how much you cared for him.
Scott had always cared for me like a real big brother. And he couldn't bear to see me hurt because of them. Just knowing how he cared was a relief to my heart.
I was collecting evidence against Rebecca to confront her for a divorce. I got the decisive evidence today and came to discuss it with your parents.
Turning to Dad and Mom, I saw them looking distressed. Dad was even apologizing profoundly to Scott. "I'm sorry for Rebecca to do such a thing. We're deeply ashamed as parents. We know an apology won't make up for it. Please, do whatever you feel is necessary to find peace." Watching Mom cry and apologize, my heart ached.
Please, lift your heads. It's not your fault. Those who used Natasha and committed these acts are the ones to blame.
Though Scott must be hurting too, he remained composed and comforted my parents. After calming them down, he turned to me.
Natasha, what are your wishes? I'm fine as long as I can sever ties with Rebecca. But you must want more than that.
Yes.
My wife seduced your husband. I bear some responsibility. I want to support you fully, so you can find closure.
Empowered by his resolute gaze, I declared my desire for revenge.
I want to show those two who belittled me what true hell feels like.
Overwhelmed with anger and frustration, I let my tears flow freely. Looking up at Scott, I voiced my true feelings for the first time.
I want them to taste despair. Leave the financial aspect to me. I'll do everything I can. What do you want to do with those two?
Hearing Scott's words, I candidly voiced a plan that had come to mind. I have to say I was surprised at how quickly such a daunting idea had occurred to me. Scott, Dad, and Mom all agreed to cooperate upon hearing it. And so, our family's revenge plan commenced.
Natasha, what were you thinking? How dare you lock us up like that?
2 days later, Tanner and Rebecca, finally escaping from the shutter, showed up at my parents' house. They were still in the same clothes from 3 days ago, likely not having showered. Their clothes were wrinkled and faintly sour-smelling. Rebecca's makeup was ruined, her face and attire a mess.
Who do you think is responsible for being locked up like that?
I calmly responded at the entrance. But my response seemed to infuriate them even more.
Shut up! You think you can talk down to me like that, huh? How could you lock us up and leave us for 2 days? If it weren't for the service guy, who knows what could have happened to us? When we went back home, we found strangers and they showed us some contract and told it wasn't our house anymore. What's going on? Explain yourself.
The truth was, with Scott's help, that garage was set to be demolished. Since the house also belonged to me, while they were locked up, I moved all the essentials to our family home. The house is now being rented out to an acquaintance. It was designed considering eventual cohabitation with our parents, so it found a tenant quickly due to its excellent accessibility. Tanner's belongings were haphazardly packed into bags and sent to his parents' house. With the people Scott brought in, the work was done swiftly and efficiently.
The noise and the stink, give me a break. Just hearing those screams in the morning is enough to stress me out.
I grimaced in disgust at their state. Tanner, unable to tolerate my expression, lunged at me. But Scott appeared and grabbed his arm, protecting me.
Scott! You two really are despicable. A man who dares to raise his hand against a woman. What kind of character do you have? Aren't you ashamed? Why is Scott here, and even Mom and Dad?
It's our family home, so naturally, Dad and Mom would be there. But what truly shocked Rebecca wasn't that. Everyone who used to dote on her now stood behind me, protecting me. She couldn't understand why no one was trying to help her.
Don't you realize the situation you're in? What did you say?
As Tanner shook off the restraining hand and scowled. Scott played the recording from the other day.
What? We were being bugged. But how, where?
They didn't have any wearable devices or mobile phones on them, so it seemed impossible that they were bugged. While they were confused, Scott smirked mischievously.
I've been aware of your affairs for a while now. That's why I hired an investigator to gather decisive evidence of your infidelity.
Upon hearing Scott's words, Rebecca's face turned pale. She thought her affairs had gone unnoticed, never imagining she was under investigation. Overwhelmed by the professionalism of the investigators, Rebecca was speechless, as if engulfed in darkness.
Never thought you'd provide such conclusive evidence. I was so surprised, I laughed, Scott said. That's a crime. Yeah. If we report this to the police. Do you two have any evidence of that? Scott countered.
Their attempts to intimidate Scott were futile. His firm stance, showing no fear and words sounding like he was about to hunt them down, caused Tanner and Rebecca to falter.
If you two, who are financially inferior to me, want to hire a lawyer and go to court, I'm more than ready. If I say I just happened to encounter you and recorded it, it doesn't prove I hired an investigator. If you want to challenge me, gather evidence that could defeat me first.
Indeed, a savvy businessperson. His quick thinking is extraordinary. The two, unable to respond, switched their target to me.
What about you locking us up? That's a serious crime. Do you have proof? What?
Stunned by the question, Tanner was at a loss for words. Now it was my turn to corner them.
There's no evidence that I locked you up, but there's proof of your affair on the garage's security cameras. I bet they captured some unsightly footage of you two getting into the car and doing indecent things."
Hearing this, the color drained from their faces, and they began to back away in fear.
"I believed your words for years, thinking you truly cared for me. But it was all an act, just to connect with Rebecca and cheat on me. No, it's not like that. Natasha, please forgive me. I really love and no one else. Me too. What happened with Tanner was just a momentary lapse, nothing serious. I swear it's true. Please believe me, forgive me, Scott."
Realizing their disadvantage, the two abruptly changed their tone and started apologizing. They were clinging to our feet, weeping and pleading for forgiveness in their disgraceful state.
"Let go." "What?" "I said let go."
I yelled at Tanner, and Scott shook Rebecca off.
"Why would anyone forgive you too? No matter what happens, I will never forgive you. No matter how much you apologize or beg, I will never forgive you. Rot in hell with your regrets."
With an anger never shown before, the two were thoroughly intimidated and fled the house. Dad and Mom, who had been watching worriedly, came to comfort me, and Scott gently stroked my hair, saying I did well. At that moment, overwhelmed with relief, I broke down in tears. The harrowing days I endured felt like hell itself. Clinging to memories, I tried to endure, but I was reaching my limit. Before breaking down, I managed to end that life, and the feeling of liberation made my emotions erupt. Thus, I successfully executed my revenge on Rebecca and Tanner. They fled to Tanner's parents' house, but as I had already explained the situation, they were denied entry and turned away. Moreover, due to their misconduct, John, my father-in-law, refused to employ him any longer. Tanner was already problematic at the company, so it didn't take long for him to be disowned, as I learned later. Rebecca and Scott soon divorced. Despite Rebecca's pleas until the end, she lacked the financial means to contest the divorce settlement and had no choice but to accept Scott's terms. Naturally, Tanner and Rebecca were charged a significant sum for compensation, considering the cancellation of the wedding and all the preparations that were ruined. Thanks to Scott hiring an excellent lawyer, we managed to make the two sign an agreement ensuring they'd pay up, and now they are both working desperately to fulfill it. I explained the situation to everyone who was supposed to attend the wedding. They were all disillusioned but supportive, offering understanding and assistance. I also made sure to explain the situation to the neighbors when the two were locked in the shutter for 2 days. I didn't want any commotion or the police getting involved, which would jeopardize the plan. Being well liked by the neighbors and Rebecca being known as the unpleasant sister who always looked down on me, everyone sided with me. As a result, Tanner and Rebecca are now viewed coldly by everyone. Once living a lavish life, they now lead a life of poverty, struggling daily, considerably thinner, as I've heard from friends. 4 years have passed since the incident. I'm devoted to my work, and Scott is also busy with his own. Dad and Mom are living fulfilling days, supporting my life and career. They even encourage me to find happiness when I meet the right person, motivating me to look forward. Hoping to make them proud, I'm also investing in self-improvement.